Let's see. Okay, and we are live. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I am Zach Hancock. I am the host of the channel. I'm an evolutionary biologist. I specialize in population genetics. And I am joined here by two wonderful guests, Jordan for Reasons to Doubt and Grayson Hawk. And I'm going to let my two guests introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their channel. And then also tell us if you are aware or if you have seen the debate that we're going to be talking about tonight. So Jordan, take it away.
Sure. So I run the Reason to Doubt YouTube channel. It's a channel about skepticism. And we do talk about things other than the Shroud of Turin, I promise. I have not seen this debate. So I decided that as an engineer, I would lend my expertise on this topic. Namely no expertise whatsoever. So my goal is to be the stand-in for the lay audience who should in an online debate be the intended audience, the people who don't know, like, aren't the experts, because most people aren't experts, right? Yeah. And so I'm today's resident idiot. That's the plan.
Nice.
And my name is Grayson. My middle name is Hawk. On my YouTube channel, I generally just investigate the pseudoscientific and illogical claims made by apologists in the service of their agendas in various fields of science, like evolution, flat Earth, everything in between, all the crazy pseudoscientific claims in archaeology, and, just whatever. It runs the gambit. So a particular passion of mine is the evolution and creation discussions. I've done, it must be approaching 100 or plus online arguments with creationists and people that say they're not creationists but make creationist arguments, and again, everything in between. So I know Professor Dave, and I watched this debate when it was happening live. But since then, I went back and rewatched it to prepare for this. And just, I feel like I've got a little bit of whiplash from this debate. And I'm very much looking forward to talking about it, because this one was, it was certainly a debate.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was one of the debates of all time.
It was one of the debates that's happened in the history of debates. Yeah, so this was a fairly interesting debate in that it seemed very much to me like the interlocutors weren't very clear on what the debate topic was going to be, and we can talk a little bit sort of about that. But the main sort of themes that I'm hoping to get away from this, and maybe I should introduce the debate for those just joining here. So the debate was between Professor Dave Explains and Subboor Ahmad. I presume most people here have either seen the debate or are aware of these two characters. And the debate title was, "Is Darwinian Evolution a Fact?" And so what I want to do today is first, or sort of the themes, the goals for this is to talk a bit about the science. Like, that's kind of my main interest, obviously, in this, is to talk about the science, to clarify it, and then to also talk about a little bit about the history of the science, because Subboor is going to go really down this sort of history of science route. So I think it's important to kind of clarify that. And so most of this discussion, I expect, is going to be spent during his opening statement. I feel like we're probably going to do a lot of talking in his opening statement, trying to clarify the science. And then after that, when Dave does his, and then they do the rebuttals and the open discussion, I think this is going to be a lot more thinking about the performance of the two debaters, what sort of the key points that they're trying to drive, where they're misunderstandings, because I think at several points they're not understanding each other, why that is happening, and how maybe we can clarify what's trying to be said. And then at the end, I kind of want to just sort of think about, was this a successful debate? And Jordan can really help us here, is like, as an audience member, did you come away from this debate with more or less clarity on the debate topic? Like, do you feel like you learned something from either of these people, right? I think that's sort of an important component of any debate. Yeah, so those are the main themes. Going into this, both of these guys obviously have like axes to grind against each other. They've clearly have like some internet history of fighting that I didn't know about when I first watched this debate, and I was like, oh god, these dudes really hate each other. So they have axes to grind, and it becomes very clear in the way that they handle each other. The original debate is almost an hour and 40 minutes. We can't watch the whole hour and 40 minutes. So what I have done is I've clipped it down to 36 minutes. And I tried to clip it in such a way that the ideas are coherent, that everybody still gets to make their cases. But I just removed some of the superfluous stuff so that we could try to really get to the substance of the debate. Anytime there's a time lapse, there's a transition, you'll see a blur. And so that way you know that I've cut some time out there. So I recommend everybody, if you haven't seen the full debate, be sure you see the full debate and you can judge if you think I'm being unfair and how I'm cutting it. Yeah. So, and lastly, so sort of most of the talking is going to be done by Subboor, because that's who we really sort of want to deal with, and we really want to sort of address his claims. So we're, not going to quite hear as much from Dave. Don't take that as like we didn't want to hear from Dave. It's just like, we don't want to listen to things that we already agree with. We kind of want to hear Subboor and deal with
typical anti-Dave creationist nonsense, silencing his voice.
Yeah. Just putting him in the corner right off the bat. Yeah. So if anybody has any questions or anything like that, tag me as we go through, and we'll try to answer some questions and get some clarity. So with that, let's go ahead and get started.
Okay, so the question before us tonight is Darwinian evolution a fact? So the first thing I need to do is define what I mean by Darwinian evolution. Now, I am defining Darwinian evolution as the modern synthesis or neo-Darwinism, and the reason for this is because it's the foundation currently of evolutionary theory. And there are objections to the neo-Darwinian modern synthesis by the likes of James Shapiro, Denis Noble.
Okay, so I want to stop here for two reasons. One is that I'm cited here. I get cited on the very first slide. If you haven't noticed.
Oh, wow, I didn't even notice that. That's cool.
This is my paper is this first sentence here. I wrote that sentence. So this paper was published in Evolution, which is the journal for the Society for the Study of Evolution. It is the oldest society in the world for studying evolution. It was founded in 1946. And this paper was written as part of their 75th anniversary sort of edition, where they asked us to review old papers that had been published in the journal. So that's where this paper comes from. I use the modern synthesis and neo-Darwinism interchangeably in this paper because the paper that I'm reviewing actually calls the modern synthesis neo-Darwinism. And it's doing this for historical reasons because Gould, this paper was about Stephen Jay Gould and punctuated equilibrium. Gould liked to call the modern synthetic architects neo-Darwinians. And so what the response was they were just using neo-Darwinism as they were just taking the mantle, fine, we'll go with that mantle. So I use the terms interchangeably here. I think sorry, go ahead, Grayson.
So I just have to ask, how does it feel having your paper being quote mined right here by Subboor, right out the gate to say that your paper is the source for his statement here that by Darwinism, what he means is neo-Darwinism.
It's kind of funny in that when I first saw it, I was a little taken aback. I was a little surprised to see myself cited in an internet debate. But also a little flattered. Look at this. People are reading my work. It's nice to see the work disseminated to the general public. But it's clear that he's okay, we have Darwinism, which I mean neo-Darwinism, which I mean modern. It's all right. What do any of these words mean then? If we can just if they're all equivalent.
Well, I think this is really the sign that you've arrived. If your paper is being cited in internet debates, I think that means that you've made it.
Yeah, so I want to make the point here that I don't while obviously he's using these terms incorrectly, if it were the case that he is just saying all I mean is modern evolutionary theory, and that's what I mean by Darwinian evolution, then fine, you can call it whatever you want, right? So long as everyone agrees that that's how we're using these terms. And what we're going to see is that was very clearly not agreed upon beforehand. And it ends up being a major source of confusion and contention because people are using words in different ways.
Well, definitely what you want to do with a debate is get a title and then do no discussion whatsoever about what that title means. You want to hash all that out live in front of the audience.
Yeah. So this was, I was unsure about how much discussion they had about this, but I would have assumed that if you were going to have this high profile debate, you would have chatted through like the title and what it meant and what Darwinian evolution meant. Like you would have like hashed this out. They very clearly did not.
Sorry, Jordan. Go on.
I'm a little disappointed because I reviewed the Dave Tor debate, the Dave against Tor debate, and it clearly did not the same thing. Like they clearly had not hashed out terms beforehand. Which, if you've never done a debate, that's like on you as a debater to handle some of that stuff prior to, so that you don't waste time and everyone's like, nobody wants, like, that's not entertaining for anyone. So I'm a little disappointed that clearly Dave has not learned from that experience.
I think that this whole conflation and mix-up of terms thing is something that is very intentional on Subboor's part, and is like something that was like a tacit assumption of Dave's. Like when Dave saw the proposal for is Darwinian evolution a fact, he said, well, yeah, that's easy because, you know, mutation and natural selection happens factually, so it's a fact. Like it's a sort of, you just assume that what you understand as Darwinian evolution, like what most people would, is also what your opponent means by it. But I think that Subboor is intentionally doing that because, like, again, he's just saying Darwinism is neo-Darwinism, is the modern synthesis. And he already knows that he has very different definitions for all of these words. I mean, I don't know if you guys have listened to any of his previous debates that he had with Aaron Ra or with James Fodor on this topic. But in those debates, he has a very different tact than in this one, where he just says Darwinian evolution is a theory, and so therefore it cannot be a fact because scientific theories are provisional. And so he says, you might think that this equally applies to all theories, like atomic theory or germ theory, and you're correct. Like that was his argument in the previous versions of this debate. But we'll see here that he means something slightly different here. But I just wanted to get the take, like, am I going insane here? Is there any other example of any other terms where that term is the same thing as the neo version of that term? Like colonialism, not neo-colonialism, Marxism, not neo-Marxism. Like adding neo in front of it is always going to be a differentiating factor from the word without neo. So the very first thing he starts out with this debate is Darwinism. I just mean neo-Darwinism. I'm just like, huh? How are you doing that? Why are you citing Zach for this?
Yeah, and he's also using this because he means it even further, right? He also means like modern evolutionary theory as well, because he's going to make this case that, well, it's the foundation of evolutionary theory. So he's really talking about everything that's included within it. But he, as we're going to see, he's going to shift around on this stuff. He's going to be very squishy on this definition when it suits him best. Let's hear him out a little more here.
And others. Now, there's 4 pillars of neo-Darwinism, according to Denis Noble, and all 4 of these pillars, according to him, have fallen. The first one is the central dogma, which is DNA to RNA to proteins. There's only one way causation of information. Now, according to him, that's not true. Although the dogma holds in that direction, it is not the only way that information is conveyed. The second pillar is the Weismann barrier. This is the idea that the genome is isolated from the soma cells. The third is the passive vehicle, that the organism is a passive vehicle to retain genes which are active causally in the process of evolution. The last pillar is the pillar of randomness. So what?
All right, what I want to do here is point out to the audience something that should be very obvious to all of us. Not a single one of these supposed pillars of neo-Darwinism, which remember he's using as the modern synthesis, as a synonym for modern evolutionary theory, not a single one of them are a mechanism of evolution. Natural selection is apparently not a pillar of modern evolutionary theory. Mutation is apparently not a pillar of modern evolutionary theory. Like, I'm a little stunned that these, of the 4 possible things one could pick as pillars of evolutionary theory, these are the 4 things he picked. And it's particularly bothersome to me because, going back to him citing me in the previous slide, I actually give, in 2 paragraphs down, 5 pillars of the modern synthesis. I list out what the 5 pillars are, and not a single one of them appears on this list. So it's actually quite baffling to me that he's willing to cite me when he wants to conflate terms, but he's not willing to cite me for like what the actual pillars of the modern synthesis are.
That is funny. Did you actually, like, in your paper call them pillars? Like these are the 5 pillars that
I don't know if I used the word pillar, but I said like central tenets.
Okay.
In effect, like these were the main ideas, the main things that everyone agreed upon coming out of it. These were the things that were established, and none of them are on this list. So yeah.
In addition to Subboor like contradicting the own sources that he cites for his arguments, he also contradicts himself. Like I won't get into spoilers, but I don't know if we'll see this part in the video later on. But just suffice it to say that he gets on to Dave for a very minor mistake about timelines, but it's pertinent because he says, well, how could neo-Darwinism be in the 90s if the people that are like the foundational ones creating neo-Darwinism are from like the 1890s and from the 1900s? And he cites people like Weismann and them. And it's like, those guys that you're saying are the ones that started neo-Darwinism, which is Subboor's own words as like the founders of neo-Darwinism. And yet he has the central dogma with DNA to RNA to proteins, which didn't occur until like way later in the 50s and 60s. So it's already contradicting himself just with his own arguments that he's not even clear on the terms he's using.
Maybe it would be helpful for the audience and just in general for us to define what these terms mean in a scientific context and like in the historical context, right? Maybe that would be helpful. So Darwinism is like the OG idea, and basically what it is natural selection that's acting upon variation, and it's the inheritance of acquired characters. Remember that Darwin did not know anything about genes. He didn't know anything about inheritance, and he believed that the environment would actually shape the hereditary material. So that's Darwinism. Neo-Darwinism is the idea that was put forward by August Weismann and widely promoted by Alfred Russel Wallace, that there's actually a separation between the body cells and the germ cells. And the separation between these two prevent the inheritance of acquired characters. So if you lose a thumb or something, you're not going to give birth to children without thumbs. Like that's the Weismann barrier. That's the idea behind it. And so that became what George Romanes called neo-Darwinism. And he called it neo-Darwinism. The neo part is the rejection of the inheritance of required characters that Darwin accepted. That's why it became neo-Darwinism. But again, Mendelian genetics was not yet discovered. Nobody knew anything yet about the mechanism of inheritance when neo-Darwinism was first coined. It's also important to note that Romanes used it as a kind of it wasn't a nice phrase. Like he wasn't trying to be nice to these guys. He was calling them neo-Darwinians. August Weismann didn't call himself that, right? He was called that. So that's neo-Darwinism. The modern synthesis is a wholly different beast, like completely different beast. It is not just like a few ideas that are different from Darwin. It's a whole theoretical paradigm that started in 1937 with the publication of Theodosius Dobzhansky's Genetics and the Origin of Species. And it was basically completed by the 1950s, or like 1950 with G. Ledyard Stebbins' Variation and Evolution in Plants. Like, so that 13-year window was when the modern synthesis happened. And the basic ideas here was that it took Mendelian genetics and it took Darwinian selection, and it showed how those two ideas basically jived. They could explain each other. And then all of the disparate fields of biology, so whether it's embryology, whether it's systematics, whether it's genetics, whether it's paleontology, all of these different fields had their own theories of evolution. And what the modern synthesis architects did is like, no, guys, all of your fields are united by Mendelian genetics and Darwinian selection. So that's what the modern synthesis did, is it brought everybody together. It got rid of mutationism. It got rid of saltationism. It got rid of Lamarckianism. It got rid of all those excess theories of evolution and showed that there's only one uniting holistic theory of evolution. That's the modern synthesis. Now, again, that was completed by 1950. The central dogma was not enunciated until 1970. The selfish gene, so the ideas like passive vehicles and active genes, was not written until 1976.
Yeah.
Okay, so like these ideas were almost 30 years after the modern synthesis, or over 30 years after the modern synthesis, right? So that's sort of the historical background, just to make clear what these words mean going forward. We can accept. I'm fine accepting Subboor's, equivalency of these terms, whatever. But like that's what those words actually mean in the historical context.
I will say that some of the biologists also use some of this terminology interchangeably with, like, a lot of the times you can commonly find just as reference of like contemporary evolutionary theory. Sometimes biologists even will use the words neo-Darwinism or modern synthesis to just describe that. And like, I think that the way that these terms are often used, even by the professionals, is a source of a lot of confusion about these terms that is then taken advantage of by people like Noble and the Third Way and creationists to just sort of muck up public perceptions of evolution.
Yeah, definitely.
So to be clear, what Subboor is arguing is that the modern synthesis is wrong, or is he going to hide in this ambiguity in order to avoid...
He's going to hide in this ambiguity.
I will just say that the entire premise of your question is ill-formed, because there is no being clear with Subboor's argument here. Okay. He is repeatedly asked to be clear, and he will never, ever be clear about what it exactly is that he's arguing in this. At least I couldn't make heads or tails of it.
Yeah. All right. Let's hear a little further.
Denis Noble is challenging is the idea that randomness can actually generate function. Now, before I get into the argument, there's some objections that Farina has made in his video. Now, his video is very long. This is only about a minute in which he makes several mistakes. And what I want to do is clarify those. He claims that neo-Darwinism came about in the 1920s and that the modern synthesis came 70 years later, which would mean 1990s. He objected to using these terms interchangeably, and he called Denis Noble a complete clown. Now, firstly, if you go to the first slide, you can see that biologists are using these terms interchangeably, but I'm going to get into this in more detail, and you'll see why they can be used as such. Someone that has such a primitive understanding of evolutionary theory and its history, what can they actually tell us about this theory? I want you to consider a thought experiment. Imagine a history teacher who claims World War I took place in the 1960s. How can we take someone seriously who doesn't understand the basic timeline of evolutionary theory, yet is adamant that he wants to speak about it? Now let's go to...
Okay, I left this in because he's going to bring this up many, many times. And so I think it's like an important thing to sort of think about. And I wanted to get y'all's thoughts on this. Because there's sort of two things here. One is that Dave clearly said this not in the context of the debate. Dave hasn't spoken yet. So he's bringing up things that actually haven't happened in the debate. And I don't really know how I feel about that. It seems like we should be talking about the topic that's relevant to this discussion, not something that someone said in some video elsewhere. So that's a little weird to me. But in terms of the effectiveness of this, as a debate tactic, what do we think about sort of the effectiveness of trying to do this tactic?
I think it's clearly just like an attempt at character assassinating Dave to say, look, Dave was wrong this one time at 1 hour and 51 minutes in his 2.5 hour video responding to my points, instead of actually just going for like, oh, what were the broad criticisms that Dave said of my point? What are our actual disagreements in regards to the debate topic? It's very clear here that Subboor is not really interested in a good faith discussion about the actual topic. And he's just using the topic in a sort of like, oh, let's pick apart the individual meanings of words. Let's really abstract it, like make a point about something very, very small and minor in the grand scheme of things. Like, hey, Dave, speaking off the cuff, got the dates wrong. Let's use that. It's sort of like a lawyer strategy in a courtroom. Like if you can show the jury, hey, this witness was wrong about one fact one time, so that casts doubt on anything that they say. And he's just trying to plant the seeds of mistrust in the audience to try to say Dave doesn't know what he's talking about. And that's the only reason why he would include this in his opening that I can think of.
I think, first of all, the biggest mistake Subboor made here was picking that picture of Dave, because he looks like a model from the 90s. I'm sure you could find a less flattering picture of Dave if that was your goal. Character assassination. So I think that referencing things that your opponent has said before is fair play, particularly if it's something like, if I was going to debate William Lane Craig, I might reference his papers or videos he's done because he does the same
Sure.
talking points all the time.
Sure.
So I think that's fair. However, this, like, he got the exact timeline wrong about when this term was used versus the 20s. Who cares? Like, you can, in my mind, knowing the history of how you got to the idea is not super relevant as long as you understand the idea itself. It is in no way analogous to the history teacher, because obviously when things happen in history is like the central to why and how things happen, right?
Yeah, sure.
And so it's not just from a purely debate performance point of view. I don't think it is effective at the thing he's trying to do, because it doesn't feel to me as an audience member that that's a very big mistake. Now, if he could cherry pick like a more damning seeming mistake, then maybe that would be effective. But this
No, I agree. I think that maybe like the thing here is like Subboor is coming at this maybe from more of like a philosopher or a theologian, and maybe they're more interested in history and members and like characters in history. So like those sorts of things carry more weight, I think, from his perspective and maybe from his audience's perspective. Whereas scientists like often don't know the dates. Like I bet the vast majority of scientists couldn't tell you when these dates were, because that's not how we think, right? We think about the ideas and how the ideas build on each other more than like, unless you just happen to be interested in the history of science, you probably don't know these exact dates, right?
Like, I'm just thinking, so I'm a nuclear engineer, right? If you ask me to explain what happened at Chernobyl, I can explain like the mechanics and what happened and what went wrong and sort of that thing. When did it happen in history? In the 80s, right? Like the late 80s, I think. I don't know. Like, who cares?
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, it's clearly off topic, right? Like whether or not Dave mistakenly said something about the timeline of the history of evolution, it's not pertinent to whether or not Darwinian evolution is a fact, which is what Subboor is supposed to be making the case against, which like everything that he's talking about here does not further that case.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah.
But I think, it's clearly just a tactic, right? He's just trying to score points. Okay, so now let's move into him talking about Denis Noble here.
His most absurd claim, which is that Denis Noble is a complete clown. I want you to just think about that for a second. Here's a man who calls himself a professor. He doesn't have a PhD. He doesn't have a single peer-reviewed paper. He is calling one of the top evolutionary biologists in the world a complete clown. Isn't that rich? So we're going to examine him today and see why he thinks so. Maybe he knows something we don't know. Okay, so let's break down his history. We find that his earliest contribution.
Okay, so Subboor is fixing to try to like do a defense of Noble. He basically tries to read through his CV. What I want to do here is I actually want to take the opportunity, because of all the things that I think that Dave could have done a little bit better on, I think he could have done a little bit better on undermining Denis Noble's credibility. That's like, to me, and what we'll see later is like my biggest critique of Dave is like, I really think he could have driven home the Denis Noble issue a little bit better. And so I'm going to try to do that here. And I'm going to try to tell you why I don't think Denis Noble is an evolutionary biologist. And I'm going to make this case because this will come up again and again and again throughout this debate.
I would also say that you might be the origin of this whole Denis Noble is a clown claim from Dave here, because in your Denis Noble video, which everybody should go check out, it is great. Do you not have a clown emoji in the thumbnail? And so my theory is that Dave saw that and was like, got the neural wirings in his brain of like Denis Noble clown.
Yeah.
That's my old headcanon in there.
That's the association I wanted people to take. And so, but I think it is important because what Subboor is trying to do here, right, is trying to convince us that Denis Noble is actually big-brained. He's actually like this really respected dude. And so how dare Dave call him a clown, right? And so he's giving his CD right here for us. He's an Oxford professor. He's a fellow of the Royal Society. Look at this Noble model from 1962, and he claims that this is his earliest evolutionary contribution. So let's kind of pull the veil back on all of this and explain why Denis Noble is unequivocally not an evolutionary biologist. I think to be an evolutionary biologist, and I want to be clear here, it's not like you get a badge that says you are now an evolutionary biologist. Congratulations, right? Like that's
Zach?
Did he freeze for you too? Okay, not just me.
Yeah,
All
okay,
right,
it's not just me.
All right. Well,
I will just say, like, I don't want to take any of Zach's thunder or anything, but like to me, if you want to qualify of me recognizing you as an evolutionary biologist, you would need like some kind of degree in evolutionary biology or related field, and a degree in physiology isn't that related.
So did I freeze for a second?
Yes.
I think my internet blipped. Okay, sorry. Okay, I'm back. All right. So what I was saying is that okay, so it's not like you have a badge that just like lets you know you're an evolutionary biologist. In effect, to be an evolutionary biologist, I think that you have to do one of three things. You either have to have done some sort of work in the lab around evolutionary biology. So this is like you do experimental evolution, you do population genetics, you do phylogenetics, you do systematics, you do evolutionary ecology or behavioral ecology, right? Like there's some things that you research that are broadly considered within the realms of evolutionary biology. That's point number one. Denis Noble does none of those things. None of his research could fall under any of those categories. So that's one issue. The second thing is that you publish in journals that specialize in evolution. And so what we mean by that is journals like Evolution, published by the Society for the Study of Evolution. You publish in the Journal of Evolutionary Biology, in Genetics, in Molecular Biology and Evolution. There's a series of journals that evolutionary biologists publish in. Now, Denis Noble has a very long Google Scholar, but you can go through, and I've tried to make sure I went through every single one before I made this claim. He has not published a single paper in any journal that could ever be considered a journal on evolution. Not a single one. So all of his papers are in like physiology journals, or they're in journals like Progress in Molecular Biology and Biophysics, in which is a crank journal, for one. They published that like cephalopods come from outer space. And two, that he was the chief editor of when he did most of the publishing, right? So like that's point number two, why he's not an evolutionary biologist. And then the last one is, and I wore this shirt just for this. This is my Society for the Study of Evolution shirt, is that every year, all evolution societies all around the world have conferences. And if you're an evolutionary biologist, you go to these conferences, you present your work to the community, and you get critiqued of your work by the community. I've been to many of these. Never seen Denis Noble there at any of them. Never seen James Shapiro at any of them. Never seen any of these third way dudes ever go to an evolution conference. What do? They host their own little special conferences, right? That aren't actually affiliated with any society. They just do their own little thing so that they know that like the evolutionary biologists aren't going to show up and crash. And so it's like in all three, like all he would needed to do was do one of those. If he could have just done one of those things, I would know, okay, he's an evolutionary biologist. He didn't do one of those three things. So to me, that is unequivocal. He's not an evolutionary biologist.
That's just you in your ivory tower. You're threatened by Denis Noble and his big brain genius.
That must be it. That must be it. I hope I've convinced the audience that he's not an evolutionary biologist, and I think those are good reasons, and like not gatekeeper reasons. Like they're not like I'm saying, oh, he's got to have a degree in evolution. Like I'm not saying that.
You just have to do the work.
You have to have done the work, right? And he has not done the work. Anytime he publishes on evolution, they are think pieces, right? They're like, oh, here's my thoughts, and they're published in physiology journals.
I also would like to just make the point that I don't think Denis Noble is even claiming to be an evolutionary biologist. Like
I've never heard him claim that.
I saw an interview with him where he distinctly talks about how like talking about evolution is something that's talking outside of his field of expertise. Like that's how he has described it. So I don't even think that he is the one originating this claim. I think Subboor is just got it in his head that Denis Noble is not even just an evolutionary biologist. He describes him as the world's leading evolutionary biologist.
Evolutionary biologist.
The foremost evolutionary biologist in the world, which is just like, yeah, I mean, I think if Denis Noble was in the room, he would at least be uncomfortable with that, and at best, hopefully correct the record on that into like saying, no, I'm not an evolutionary biologist.
Yeah, I think at several points, like Dave even is like, most evolutionary biologists think Denis Noble is a crank or whatever. I would argue that most evolutionary biologists don't know who Denis Noble is. Like he's not even a person they know. And I tested this. I asked some people in my hall, like in my lab and stuff, like, do you know who Denis Noble is? And they're like, who? They don't know. He's not a person that like evolutionary biologists know. Okay, so I wanted to spend some time on that because it's going to come up a gazillion times. And so I just wanted to kind of make that case as we go forward.
Contributions to evolutionary theory go back to 1962 with the Noble model. Now, Noble's challenge to Dawkins, let me just break down this challenge. His challenge is based upon these 4 pillars, like I mentioned, and all of these were discussed with him in the debate in 2022. So we're going to be going over each challenge one by one. The first challenge is the central dogma, from DNA to RNA to proteins. Now, obviously, that is true. That is what happens. However, that is not the only way that causation works. That is not the only way that information flows. Information can actually go in the other direction through somatic hypermutation. This is one of the examples he brings up in the debate. Somatic hypermutation happens in the immune system when the B cells can actually, like a slot machine, they can actually hold certain parts of the genome constant and hyper-random mutate certain parts and come up with antibodies to take on the antigens.
Okay, Jordan, I want you to tell me, do you think that anything that Subboor just said makes sense or undermines the central dogma, or are you clear on anything at all about what the argument he just made was?
Oh, I stopped listening halfway through. I don't understand a single word he was saying.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, I mean, I at least I learned about the central dogma in my biochemistry degree, and when I learned about it, it was like you could get like information flow from RNA to DNA, like reverse transcription. It's just that you don't go from proteins to the DNA changes, in which case the example he just brought up also is not going from protein sequence information to DNA sequence information. Like, it's not an example of breaking the central dogma even.
Yeah. So maybe to be clear about what is the central dogma, because he's not defining it very clearly, and it is maybe.
To be clear, I started not knowing what the central dogma meant, and I ended not knowing.
Okay, yeah. So let's remedy that, and let's explain what the central dogma is. So the central dogma was proposed by Francis Crick in 1970, and it basically goes like this. It says that the precise sequential information of the DNA, so that's the A, T, C's, and G's, right, can go from nucleotide in DNA to nucleotides in RNA and back to DNA. You can do that because the sequential information is the same, right? They're nucleotides. But once you translate nucleotides into amino acids in the protein, those amino acids can't be back translated into nucleotides. And the reason that they can't be back translated is because the genetic code that codes for them is redundant. So there's lots of different codons, lots of different ATs and Cs that will give you the exact same amino acid. So you don't know what the exact sequential information was if you start with the amino acid. Does that make sense?
It's kind of like when you differentiate and integrate, you lose information. There could be multiple versions of the equation that give you the same thing. Yeah,
exactly. So
it's probably the least accessible, least like normal way to think about it.
No, but I follow it. I got you. It's basically that, right? Like that you actually have lost information. You've lost the information of the sequence, and you can't return it. That's what the central dogma is. Now, I think it's important for us to understand Subboor's argument is to try to maybe understand what he thinks it is. And I think what he thinks it is just some abstract flow of information. Okay, so if you think about just like abstractly, information goes DNA, RNA to protein. And then if you can think, okay, well, what if the environment acts upon the cell? And then whatever the cell membrane is doing, then gives information down to the nucleus level. And then at the genome, there's some rearrangement in this like somatic hypermutation. Now it seems like the information has gone from the environment into the genome. So if that's the way you define the central dogma, then I think it would be violated in that definition, right? Of like a flow of information. So I think that's what he means here. There's two big problems here. One is that, as the name implies, somatic hypermutations aren't heritable. You don't pass them on, right? So no matter what kind of genomic change happens, it's not affecting evolution because those changes don't get passed on, right? And in fact, the only cells in your body this happens in are the B cells that are being formed in your lymph nodes, right? They're not happening anywhere else. So this is not like a system-wide process. Secondly, is that actually, I don't even know if this violates like his gene-centric view. Because like, if you think about it, what happens in these B cells? So in your immune cells, you have these membranes, and along the membranes are these antigen receptors. And antigen receptors are proteins. And you get proteins from the genome, right? The genome codes for proteins that then are inserted into the membrane. And then you have these antigens floating around. Antigens are just any sort of like foreign particle. They may be produced by viruses, bacteria. It could even be things like pollen, anything that your body is going to like mount an immune response against. They will bind to these antigens, and then that sends a signal to the genome to then produce another enzyme that will then go down to this hyper variable region and just cause mutations to happen, right? So that's what's going on. But at every single step, the genome is what is in control, right? The genome is sending the information to the membrane. The genome is creating the enzyme that's going to go and do the mutations. And then the genome is creating the antibody that comes from it, right? So at all points, it still seems like the genome is what is guiding this process. So it's unclear to me how this is violating a gene-centric view, which is like sort of like Subboor's big boogeyman here.
He seems to take particular issue with the fact that it's a random hypermutation, but only of a certain like segment of the genome. It's not like just randomly mutating the entire genome. So he somehow seems to get into his head maybe that disproves like random mutation plus selection if like the mutation is only random in a certain segment. Like basically the whole old creationist argument about the hot and the cold spots of mutation in the genome. It strikes me as very similar to that. Or, you know, if in response to the environment, you are like in a very hyper mutagenic environment, basically, and then you're randomly mutating in certain spots more than others, and then those mutant varieties are then selected upon. He's trying to say that somehow violates the central dogma, which it doesn't even come close to. And also, it's weird for me, right? Because I have a degree in biochemistry, and in my degree, we learned that the central dogma is the central dogma of biochemistry. Like, we didn't even learn central dogma in any way related to evolution or evolutionary biology when I was taught this. So it's just very strange to me that he's putting the central dogma as a central pillar of neo-Darwinism.
And I think this is because Denis Noble doesn't know what he's talking about, right? Like this is why you don't listen to a physiologist talk about evolution. This is like the whole point, right? Is that he doesn't actually, and I'm not even blaming Subboor here. Like these are things that Noble says, right? So like Subboor is just this cheerleader in the background, just like, yeah, go Noble. I'll say whatever you tell me to. But like, if what you're saying doesn't make any sense, and like no evolutionary biologist would say that the central dogma is some main component of evolution. Okay, so let's hear what he has to say about the second pillar.
The second is the Weismann barrier. The Weismann barrier is the idea that the genome is isolated from the soma cells, from what's happening in the body, what's happening in the environment. Now, this was something that August Weismann put together, hence why we have the origin of neo-Darwinism in the late 19th century, not the 1920s, as Dave Freena seems to think. So why does Denis Noble challenge the Weismann barrier? He challenges it through the work of Conrad Waddington, who showed that epigenetic markings can actually be assimilated into the genome. So genetic assimilation is something that he discovered in the 1950s, and there's lots of information about this. And Denis Noble links this to the discovery of extracellular.
Okay. They're going to do a whole back and forth about genetic assimilation later. So maybe we'll save describing what that is until later, because Subboor clearly is not going to do it here. just basically, I want to make the point that the Weismann barrier has never been a pillar of evolution. I even went back to Dobzhansky's book, the 1937 one that I said was like the first book that started the modern synthesis. He doesn't even cite August Weismann in it. Like in Julian Huxley's book, all he says in it about Weismann is that like it's not as absolute as Weismann thought it was. Like that, and he says that in 1942. Also, to be clear, the Weismann barrier is only relevant to some animals. So like corals, sponges, they don't have a separation of body cells and germ cells. Plants don't have a separation of body cells and germ cells. Bacteria, protists, they don't have body cells and germs. So like this whole idea that the Weismann barrier could somehow be a pillar of evolutionary theory, and yet it only like applies to like such a tiny part of biodiversity is preposterous to me. Yeah, so just wanted to make that point. We'll talk about what genetic assimilation is later, because they're going to have like this whole back and forth about it, and I think it'll be better to try to.
It really does seem like Subboor's like strategy going into this was just to fabricate a straw man definition of Darwinism or neo-Darwinism or whatever word it is that he wants, and then like make that straw man and then tackle it and claim that he's like disproved the consensus of contemporary evolutionary theory.
Yeah. And again, like I said, I think he's doing what Noble does. Like all of these points are things that Noble says, and he basically says them in the same way, which again is why I said Noble's a clown.
That's true. I think it is a direct quote from Noble. Neo-Darwinism is dead. So It is really that Subboor is probably not even familiar with most of these actual biological concepts to come up with this fake straw man on his own. So he's just borrowing it like a game of telephone from the people at the third way.
Yeah.
As well. Randomness. So randomness alone, alongside natural selection, the idea is that genes created us, mind and body, purely through random variations plus natural selection. And this is something that Denis Noble wants to challenge head on. He doesn't believe in this. He believes that the data shows us it was not randomness, it was actually genome reorganization. One of the papers that he referred to in the debate with Richard Dawkins is the paper.
I know that might seem kind of jarring, but I promise I didn't cut out anything. Like that was like basically his transition. It was just such a non sequitur. The idea that somehow genome reorganization is different from randomness, or that the genome can be, if the genome gets reorganized, that means it's not random. Like I don't know. That was
the craziest part to me was his citations for this, where he's just citing the Human Genome Project and then Barbara McClintock's work on like the discovery of transposons.
Yeah,
and then that's the evidence, and then we're supposed to conclude that there are no random mutations. It's like I need a little bit more connecting those.
Yeah, he's fixing to give. Sorry, go ahead, Jordan.
I'm just confused why Richard Dawkins is here. Like, why is he present in this debate? It's like, it feels kind of like the thing, sort of like the man and the woman are about to have sex, and it's like, did you forget to ask somebody? You know, like
this is something I cut out a little bit of this, but at one point Subboor describes Dawkins and Noble as the two leading evolutionary biologists, and their debate sort of like characterizes where the field is going. Like that's the way he tries to pitch it, and I thought that was so absurd it wasn't even worth having, so I cut it out. But that's the claim he's making here.
In Subboor's argument and in his book, which I had the displeasure of skimming through, Dawkins very much is a stand-in for all of contemporary atheistic evolutionary theory. He goes so far to say, Dawkins, the reductionistic view of biology, the selfish gene, all of this is basically just like a religion, Darwinism. It's atheistic, and it's used only as like an excuse to do some sort of anti-God apologia. That's the tone stricken in the book. And Dawkins is essentially the stand-in for everything wrong that they want to fight against. And they say, that's why he adds basically the selfish gene as one of his 4 pillars of neo-Darwinism. Is like he basically is having Dawkins as the stand-in for all of contemporary evolutionary biology.
Yeah, I was going to say, clearly this is false because Dr. Dan and Zach are the top leading biologists in the world. Like,
that's embarrassing. All right, so let's play. He's going to give a really weird analogy. I don't even know what it means, but I'm going to let him say it, and then y'all can give me blank stares or maybe tell me why I don't understand it.
From Nature about the initial sequencing of the human genome. This involves yeast, worm, fly, humans, and others. And what we discover in this paper is that there has been genome reorganization rather than point mutations selected over time that led to all of the biological functionality that we actually have. Now, the example he gives is of Lego, which is why you see the Lego blocks there. What he basically says is, imagine a child who simply has Lego blocks, these small little blocks, and you ask them to build a bridge, build a house, build a car, whatever it is. You give another child bricks, but you also give them beams, you give them flooring, you give them walls, you give them tunnels, you give them arches, you give them lots of prefabricated tools. Which kid will build faster? And according to Denis Noble, it's going to be the second child because of genome reorganization.
I don't know what that means. I don't understand. I don't know.
I'll take a shot at it. I'll take a shot of it. Obviously, the analogy is completely muddled because all of those tools are not going to help you build a freaking Lego house. But I think what he's trying to say is that like the regulatory networks and like the transposons and different things that like don't like. I think that that's where he's trying to go with this. Is that allows you to like alter the genome and reorganize the genome and like change your phenotype. Without mutations is what I think is like my ultimate steel man of like the best case scenario of what I think he might be saying.
But that's still a mutation, right? So if a transposon moves from one place, inserts in another, that's a mutation. Like you have position effects that have now changed because you have a new inserted piece of DNA there. Like we call insertions mutations, right? We call translocations mutation. Like all of these things are mutations.
Is he trying to say that point mutations don't happen and it's only like taking pieces of the existing genome and moving them around? Is that what he's trying to say?
I think he's trying to say that point mutations don't do enough to account for like phenotypic and biological diversity, that you basically need these bigger things to happen, which I don't necessarily disagree with. Like we do have like large chromosomal changes too, but like we've also known that since the modern synthesis, like honestly, since Thomas Hunt Morgan, right? We started doing like fruit fly genetics, like because you can see their chromosomes, and they observed gigantic translocations and stuff all the time. So I don't understand. I don't understand the dichotomy here. How he seems to be trying to make this case that like, oh, all the modern synthesis cares about are point mutations, but really what matters are these big duplications and stuff. And it's like, yeah, no shit. Like we've been saying that too. Like it doesn't make any sense.
I think that you should never. I think it's just incompetence in his understanding here about like him not grasping the fact that like that these would still count as mutations. That's what I would guess.
I again the resident idiot here, but when I took like Dan's Bio 101 class, like audited it, and like if I'm recalling correctly, it was just like mutations. Here's all of them, and they were all kind of listed in one bucket because they're what like
yeah. And that's how we've always done it. Like, again, you go back to these old books, like they were like, okay, mutations, here's a gazillion different ways in which they occur. We've never been like, but ignore all of those. Only these matter.
Yeah.
Like, we don't do that.
Incredibly dumb. Like, why would anyone do that?
I think that, I don't know. I know that Subboor has like a master's degree in like philosophy of science that it says has some sort of specialization in philosophy of biology, but like I see that his undergraduate is not, it's just like a degree in philosophy. So I'm just wondering how many actual biology courses Subboor has had.
Yeah. I don't know. All right, here we go.
Hence why he doesn't believe in randomness. Now, another pillar is the passive vehicle. Now, this is the idea that the organism is passive and the genes are active. The genes are the real drivers of causality.
All right, I cut this down really short because I think this is a really stupid thing. What he's attacking here is Dawkins's metaphor. He's attacking a metaphor from a popular science book from 76. That's it. That's all he's doing. And the idea that like genes are the causal things of everything, right? Like that's sort of the straw man that he's erecting, and he's assigning Richard Dawkins as sort of the prophet of this idea. I want to try to like to sort of walk through really quickly the way in which evolutionary biologists think about the relationship between genes and phenotypes. And then in doing so, I hope I'll just give like a little bit of that complexity. You can think about that, and then we can move on from like this really, really stupid metaphor that he's trying to attack. You can think about the relationship between genes and phenotypes like as a function of distance. So in bacteria, for example, the distance between the gene and the phenotype of the bacteria is really small. The regulatory networks and stuff of bacteria are fairly simple. And so when selection acts on them, it can act fairly directly on genes themselves. Okay, that's sort of one way in which you can think about the genotype-phenotype relationship. And then when you compare that to a more complex organism like ourselves, then the distance between the gene and the phenotype grows really, really large, because there's all this complex development that has to take place, right? There's cells interacting, there's tissue formation, there's organ systems, there's all these things being built in development. And then after you're born, there's all these other forces that are also acting on you. There's cultural environment, there's the social environment, there's all of these things that are shaping how you're going to end up looking. And so the distance between your final phenotype, final is arbitrary here, but your phenotype and your genotype is very large, right? And so like this sort of analogy, I think, captures the way that evolutionary biologists try to think about the relationships between these two things. In no way do we say genes active, bodies vehicle for genes, that's it, right? Like that is the dumbest, most oversimplified thing that I've ever heard. And you would literally only read it in a book meant for like literally anybody to be able to pick up and read, right? It's just it's the most simplistic way of trying to present an idea. But no evolutionary biologist, going back to like fucking R.A. Fisher, nobody thought that bodies were just passive vehicles. That's totally stupid. That's all I wanted to say on that.
I think, okay, so speaking of books that are intended for literally anybody, right? This is actually perhaps the central idea of Subboor's book. The main thing that when you read the intro and you read the conclusion, the main problem that Subboor seems to have is what he calls the reductionist selfish gene view of, like genes have, like DNA is the ultimate authority, and then the bodies are just things that are superfluous and there's no room. And he says that this view leads to atheistic worldviews that think that there's no room for spirituality. And so he says that if you adopt Denis Noble's more systems holistic biology, where it's not just genes, it's the entire organism, then he says that this view leaves open things like free will, the soul, spirituality, because it's more holistic and less materially reductionistic. And that's the ultimate argument that they conclude the book with, is like, I think, here, let me get an exact quote from like the very end. It says, "The world of certainty and selfish genes is dead. The world of curious and spiritual people is alive." So for Subboor, this is the central point, right? Is that he thinks that if he can somehow, debunk Dawkins and the selfish gene, then and go with Denis Noble's more holistic view, then that allows him to smuggle in his metaphysics and spirituality into the equation.
I don't see why. I don't see how any of that follows from anything. Like
it doesn't.
Like just fundamentally, why would going from the zoomed in view on genes to like a more zoomed out view of still material things do anything with relation to spirituality? Where I don't understand.
Yeah, I think that like in a sense he's attacking like honestly things that many evolutionary biologists attack, and that is like hereditarianism, right? The idea that genes determine every single thing in your body and every single trait that you might have is a thing that like evolutionary biologists really try to fight against, right? Like I've made videos on this, like literally a video called "You Are Not Your Genes." I think it's a very important thing to know that you aren't your genes don't determine who you are. And so And I think, honestly, most evolutionary biologists agree with that assessment. And they have for a very long time. Like, again, you can go back to people like Sewell Wright, who promoted a very holistic view of an organism, like thinking about organism as a composition of many interacting parts. And to be clear, people like Subboor try to claim that Denis Noble and James Shapiro and then these people are like the fathers of systems biology. That's total bullshit. Sewell Wright is the father of systems biology. He invented this in 1920, right? And he's one of the founders of the modern synthesis. So if Subboor really wants to do this whole like gotcha on history thing, it would really behoove him to read a little bit more about the modern synthesis. All right, that's all I wanted to say on that.
Yeah. The simple point you can break it down to is a point of causality. According to Denis Noble, there is no blind watchmaker. Remember Richard Dawkins' book, The Blind Watchmaker, the idea that random mutations plus natural selection can actually create body and mind? According to Denis Noble, no, it can't. It is insufficient as a mechanism. He says that the designer has to be at least one-eyed. And the reason why he's saying that is because he believes purpose, agency is alive. It's there in the organism.
I don't know what that means. He does this analogy a lot, this one-eyed watchmaker. I don't know what that means.
I think it clearly means that God is a cyclops.
I mean, like in like Paley's analogy, like, okay, the fully seeing, the two-eyed watchmaker is God, right? Is the creator God. The blind watchmaker is nature. The one-eyed watchmaker is a deistic God. Like what's one? Intelligent design. Like I don't know what that means.
It's an intelligent designer without depth perception.
Yes,
right.
It's so like, designer that wears glasses.
I'm wondering, like, how good would it just be like a bad watchmaker? Is this like a way to explain like why there's all these like inefficiencies and like suboptimal designs? It's like, oh, the guy's only got one eye, you know? So
I don't know. I didn't get the analogy. It doesn't make any sense to me.
If you want my actual like good faith steel manning of this, I think it's the fact that like Denis Noble says things like intentionality and agency and purpose and meaning are like the fundamentals for his conception of like of evolution, because he thinks like that there's like an intentional agency that is involved. And so that's the reason why so many of these ID and creationist proponents latch on to his ideas is like saying like, oh, well, it's not full blown intelligent design, but he's like cracking open the door a little bit and allowing for things like intentional agency that somebody like Dawkins would never allow in. So that's why like they kind of position themselves halfway between like the creation ID people and then the standard view. That's like sort of the triangulation that the third way people like Denis Noble have attempted to go for. And I think that's maybe what Subboor is latching onto here, is like the fact that agency is some sort of fundamental in that paradigm.
Yeah, I should do a whole video on the concept of biological agency. I think it's just like such a vacuous idea and like completely empirically meaningless. And it's surprising to me how many people think that it's interesting. And I think it's just the dumbest thing that makes no sense at all. I should just do a video on it. All right, so this is the closing out of Subboor's statement. And I include this because, again, he's going to make these comments throughout. So just to give you kind of the context.
Forward to hearing from Farina on his thoughts, and I'm looking forward for him to justify his statements about evolutionary theory's origin and its history, and his comments about Denis Noble.
Okay, so I must have cut out the part where he says, I hope Dave is going to give us a present, and this present is that he's going to explain why Denis Noble is a clown. Okay, so that was Subboor's opening. As I expected, that took half of our time. So I think the second half will go a lot faster because basically I think we've hashed through most of the ideas here, and now we can kind of maybe let them go back and forth. And any closing thoughts about Subboor's opening before we move forward?
I don't understand most of what he said. I didn't understand like the analogies. I didn't understand how they work together as a whole. About half of his points didn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
So I'm not feeling super persuaded at the end of his.
And I promise I didn't cut out like any important context. Like everything there is like the coherent thought. Everything between it are just like his ramblings that he kind of goes off topic. And so I just tried to trim it and like make it actually try to make it more tight and more coherent than the way he actually delivered it.
To me, the opening was just the construction of a straw man that he's conflated with Darwinian evolution, that this straw man is resting on 4 pillars that he's tried, like that he's misattributed to it, and then he's tried to shoot down each of those 4 pillars. But even the 4 pillars of his own straw man, like the arguments that he's providing against those pillars still are not valid or sound arguments.
Yeah,
so
like
on every level in this phase.
If you're gonna build a straw man, the whole point is that it's easy to defeat. Like that is the entire point of the exercise.
Yeah, he couldn't even knock down his own straw man.
Right? So if you're telling me that like this is an artificially constructed thing that this guy made up for the purposes of the debate, that's even worse.
Yeah. Okay. So for Dave's opening, I've really cut out a lot. This is going to be really short. And the reason for this is because the vast majority of the things Dave says ends up never being talked about again. So there's this whole part in Dave's opening where he basically like gives you kind of like a intro evolution class thing. He talks about homology, talks about phylogeny, like he goes through sort of the evidence for evolution. Never again does any of it get mentioned. Like they never talk about any of it. So I cut all of that out and I just focused on the things that end up getting brought up again. So and as well as sort of I think give Dave's angle on this. So we're gonna see it divert. They're gonna disagree really quickly on the debate topic.
All right, so this is supposed to be a debate about evolution. As you can already see, there will be very little discussion of actual science because Subboor is incapable of it. He doesn't actually understand any of the things he's referencing. Instead, these are the things he does. He fixates on the definitions of words and distorts them. He hides behind philosophical jargon. He misquotes scholars, pretends they support his lies, and shouts a lot, typically. So we'll discuss the details of the distortions in the debate, but for now, let's hear from Subboor's super duper favorite philosopher, Elliot Sober. Sober is explicitly stating that Subboor misrepresents him.
Yeah, he tries to play a video here. The audio doesn't play. So basically, yeah, the video was just supposed to be Elliot Sober saying that Subboor misquotes him.
So it's a shame you couldn't hear it, but that's what he says. To prove his incompetence, you just need to look at the title of this debate. He insists on this debate with this ridiculous title over and over again, and it's completely meaningless. First, let's talk about the part with Darwinian evolution. So let's make it perfectly clear that he doesn't actually know what Darwinian evolution means. He regularly says it's the current evolutionary paradigm. It isn't. So, yeah, it's a model from the 19th century. He's trying now to obfuscate and talk about neo-Darwinism, conflate it with all these other models. That's not what the title of the debate is. I'm going to stick to the title of the debate.
Yeah, so very clearly, this is when I realized, shit, they didn't actually talk about the title of this debate and what this meant, right? So right off the bat, it's setting the groundwork for what's going to turn into a semantic debate, right? It's just a debate over what do words mean, guys, and who uses words when, and how do we use them, right? Which is quite an unfortunate thing. I think that Dave here is correct. Like, I think that he's right in the way that he's going to define Darwinism and use it in this context. It's unfortunate that the debate ends up being about semantics.
Darwinian evolution refers to descent with modification and natural selection. That's all. It sounds like he wants to talk about neo-Darwinism, but that's not what he called the debate. So that's his bad. Now the bit about being a fact. Subboor doesn't actually know what a fact is. Objects and concepts are not facts. Would you say that a chair is a fact? That doesn't mean anything. A fact is a singular datum. We could say that that chair exists. That's a fact. Statements can be facts. So, unlike a fact, which is a singular datum, a theory is a model that correlates a variety of disparate data and explains them all elegantly in a singular model, which makes falsifiable predictions. Theories can yield facts. I'm sure Subboor would agree that it is a fact that the Earth goes around the sun, and yet this understanding is called heliocentric theory. Demonstrating his confusion, Subboor constantly claims that facts are absolute, certain, not subject to revision. This is false. He contrasts this with theories, which to him are hopelessly uncertain, subject to eternal revision, and can never be proven. This just shows that Subboor doesn't actually even know what science is. Proof is for mathematics and logic. Science doesn't prove anything ever.
Yeah, so when Grayson, you were talking about this earlier, that Subboor uses this like changing what theories are and stuff. It seems like maybe Dave prepared for that, right? Like he went into this thinking that that was going to be what Subboor talked about, and I think that's why he is doing all of this like what is a theory, what is a fact thing, which again like it's never again mentioned. This ends up not being relevant.
It's 100%. And he did say so, I think, in his review or something, that he had watched the debate with Aaron Ra, and that was essentially Subboor's entire tact in that, was to try to say it's a theory, not a fact. Scientific theories are provisional, therefore they cannot be facts. And that was like the central point of his arguments the last time he did a debate with this exact topic.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad he's not doing that anymore, because that's dumb. That's really dumb.
Yeah, I would think that maybe he learned better, but I would not put my money on it.
Yeah.
Science, once theories hold up after decades or even centuries of verification through rigorous testing, we say that they are consistent beyond reasonable doubt. Never do theories become facts. Never do they become laws. Never do we regard them as absolute, but simply so incredibly consistent with reality that it would be unreasonable to presume that they are not true. There's another problem here. Subboor regularly says that observations are facts, so to him, an observation can be considered factual. Well, we observe Darwinian evolution every single day, so it factually occurs by his own standard. Now, Subboor will probably claim that's not what he means by Darwinian evolution. In fact, he's clearly already obfuscating and trying to talk about more modern paradigms. He's going to say he meant common ancestry, tree of life, all the stuff that Noble talks about. In addition, that's what he doesn't like. That's fine. We can talk about all these other things. We can talk about Noble. We can talk about all these other mechanisms that you don't actually understand. But first, concede the debate. Darwinian evolution factually occurs, and men never do a debate with this dumb fuck title ever again.
This part really tripped me out because like obviously like Subboor has to concede this point because like Darwinian evolution is very clearly about natural selection, right? Like that is what Darwin proposed. That's the central claim, is natural selection acting on variation between individuals, right?
Zach, you know he's not going to concede that.
I know he's not, because I've seen the debate, but it's like
so I'll say like that felt very effective. Like that 30 seconds there felt more effective than Subboor's entire opening.
Yeah.
You know?
Good job, Dave.
So that was really good for me as an audience member. And so like what I'm immediately thinking is whereas with Subboor was talking, just kind of washing over me, like there's a lot of details I'm not understanding. Like I'm not really sure where he's going. This is very clear. There's a clear picture and then a challenge to his interlocutor that's tying into the title, right?
Yeah.
And so just strategically, if I were Dave, I'd be like, we're not moving on from here until we're done talking about this right here. This is like as strong a point as he could make.
Yeah. And I think that that's effectively what he does, right? He tries to draw this line and he's like, no, we're not going to move on until you concede this point. And so, I also found it pretty effective. And in such a way that like Subboor really tries to weasel out of it, but I don't think he does a very good job. I think, in fact, I have a few clips later on where he effectively says, I accept Darwinian evolution, right? And in effect concedes the debate.
I will say that maybe I'm a little bit mixed on what you guys are saying. I see that Dave putting forth the effort to like try to force Subboor to focus on this topic, but I do think that Subboor was successfully able to weasel himself out of it. And it is so frustrating because like he is just repeatedly asked over and over and over again, and he will just dodge and dip and dive. Like it is actually impressive to watch how much he refuses to answer these.
Yeah, I think it's because this is like what Subboor does, right? Is he's like a street debater kind of like he just debates all the time. And if you've done this a gazillion times, then you just learn how to like never admit anything and how to always weasel out of stuff. Like you just get good at that particular, style of debate. But like if you really listen, I've listened to this debate enough times, like through this editing, he does admit it several times. And I think maybe he does it so subtly that Dave doesn't quite grab onto it and like pin him down on it.
The way that he does it, though, is by saying, if all you mean by Darwinian evolution is, descent with modification and natural selection, then of course, nobody can argue that. That's of course a fact. But that's not what Darwinian evolution is. And he tries to redefine Darwinian evolution away from the definition that Dave has provided. He's like, oh, well, if Dave's definition is correct, then of course it's a fact. But that's not what it really is. Then he tries to go back to admittedly an even new straw man that he didn't even put forth in his opening. He just creates a newer straw man version of Darwinian evolution later on.
Yeah.
Lastly, just like any other intelligent design propagandist, Subboor pretends there is so much controversy and debate within the scientific community. There isn't. And as predicted, he points to figures like Denis Noble to pretend this much. And I'm sorry, Subboor, he is a joke. And you know so little about him that you don't even know that he's not an evolutionary biologist. He's a physiologist. He's not an evolutionary biologist. He's funded by the Templeton Foundation to spread this kind of propaganda, to give some creationists something to talk about. That 2016 meeting you're talking about was funded by the Templeton Foundation. Nobody in evolutionary biology gives two shits about this guy. I'm very sorry to tell you.
Yeah, so I don't know how effective that particular part of Noble was. That's all he said about Noble, really, was just like right there in that little window. I think that he could have, if Dave had known that Noble was going to be such a central point, maybe he would have dedicated some more time to it.
Yeah. That's my take as well, especially given the fact that Dave has announced that he is going to be making a Denis Noble debunking video. And so I'm sure that this point of the debate would be very different if he had done that video prior to having this debate and was more familiar, because it did seem like, and I think that this is probably one of the points that Subboor did more strongly, is like where Dave was trying to hold his feet to the fire and get him to admit that, Darwinian evolution happens, which is the topic. Subboor was holding Dave's feet to the fire and really hammering on 2 points. The timeline mistake that Dave made earlier. He's like, oh, you were wrong, you can't admit it, you were wrong, and just trying to like cast shade on his trustability because of that prior mistake. And he keeps bringing that over and over and over. And the second point is, you keep saying Denis Noble was a clown, but you can't tell me why. You cannot justify it with specifics. And I do think that was correct. Like it did, like when continually pressed, Dave was not able to provide the specifics about, well, here's why I called Denis Noble a clown. Like the specifics were just not on hand at the time. And I do think just from the aesthetics point of view, that sort of made Dave's position look a little bit weaker, because like he couldn't really deliver a sufficient answer about why he's a clown, other than he's funded by the Templeton organization and nobody takes him seriously. He couldn't drill down on specifics.
Well, you could just strategically, first of all, if anybody's going to do a debate, if there's a word in the title that could possibly be misconstrued, you need to figure out what the other person means by it. Because if he had done that homework, he would have, I think, gotten a clue of that this guy had changed his things. That's like a strategic thing. But I mean, I guess we'll see what he's going to do. But if I were in Dave's place, what I would probably do is just duck it by saying science isn't dominated. Like in science, we don't have authorities. It doesn't matter what Noble says or what I say or what anybody says. What matters is their evidence, their papers. So we're just going to duck this entire clown thing.
Yeah.
And we're going to focus on the evidence, and just that would be the one I would use.
I do think that there is a way to do it that brings it back to the actual conversation topic, to be like, well, Noble's ideas are clownish because he's rejecting neo-Darwinism, which is substantiated by this evidence, and to bring it back to your argument about But again, neo-Darwinism is not even the topic. So it is really crazy, like the amount of conflation that Subboor has done. And like, it really is clear that Subboor is not interested in any way, shape, or form about actually discussing the agreed upon topic. He just wants to focus on things that Dave has said in the past. He wants to focus on finding clips that he can use for YouTube shorts that make Dave look bad. Like, he's definitely not here in good faith. And it, like, speaking from someone that, like, I do have difficulties in debates dealing with people in bad faith. Like, it makes it much more difficult if the other person is not actually interested in engaging with the topic at hand and is only interested in like a meta conversation or the aesthetics of the conversation that they can clip out for use later.
Yeah, I think Shasset is also right here. We haven't seen a lot of James in this, but especially in some of the discussion later on, there were many times in which I wish James would have stepped in.
Is this James from Modern Day Debate?
No, James Fodor.
I don't know. I don't know the MDD guy's last name, so I don't know.
Oh yeah, no. This was like on his channel. Yeah.
Okay.
And he's like, yeah, he was the moderator, and there were several points in which I think Dave, like allows Subboor to like talk over him, and then just kind of like lets him finish his sentence, but like never like gets the reins back, you know. And I think if when you have that sort of personality difference, I think it's the moderator's job to be sure that the other person is getting to make their points, and like without having to like bully over that. Like, you really shouldn't have to like shout down your opponent. It should be the moderator's job to make sure that people are getting equal time to speak. And I really don't think that that James like interjected quite enough during the discussion.
I will say I always really appreciated when James came in as a moderator, but you're right. He didn't do it enough. Like, when he did come in, he would say, okay, I've muted Subboor, Dave, you can finish talking, or he'll drill down and say, and I thought that he was actually really great and insightful when he did step in. It just wasn't frequently enough. Like, he did step in at one point and said, here's the confusion that I see. You guys are talking past each other now. Subboor, could you clarify what you meant with here? But then Subboor just goes on to not clarify at all and continue to just like trample over the conversation and change the subject. And James does not step back in and just sort of lets it like fall on Dave to wrangle back the conversation to the question that was posed by the moderator, which I think is just too laissez-faire.
Yeah. Okay, let's hear Subboor's rebuttal. So now obviously the tone is fixing to shift. They're fixing to start doing like the back and forth kind of the squaring off fisticuffs kind of stuff. All right, so let's do it.
All right. So one of the first claims that he actually makes is that no one uses the term Darwinism. Here we have Richard Dawkins in The Devil's Chaplain. This particular term again turning up when Denis Noble's book Dance to the Tune of Life. He refers to the modern synthesis version of Darwinism. So again, it is a term being used. Okay, so
I just played this just to give him like to show that he did try to address this term conflation thing. He's clearly, this is a thing that should have been agreed upon beforehand or should have been made clear about how we're going to use these words.
But that's not even him addressing the conflation. That's just him saying, well, these guys have said the word Darwinism before. And he's just, if Denis Noble has said it, if Richard Dawkins is saying it, then it must be like a well-used term in biology, according to this.
Right. Well, if Richard Dawkins wrote it in a book for a popular audience one time, and the world's leading biologist, Denis Noble, says it, then
that must be true. Yeah.
Yep, you can see it there. This is my email going back to you. I don't want you to gish gallop and conflate two different ideas. To be clear, my original two debates were, is Darwinian evolution a fact? Is intelligent design science? Is universal common ancestry true? The reason I did this is because I don't want Darwinian evolution and universal common ancestry mixed up. Like I said, blah, blah, blah. So I knew you were going to do this. And guess what this is? This is, again, the equivocation fallacy, because if common ancestry is accepted to be true, it doesn't mean Darwinian evolution is true. Now, you said...
This is the most gaslighting thing I've ever seen. Like, accusing Dave of conflation of terms with Darwinism. the amount of projection here is difficult to deal with in debates like this, when you just feel like the other person is describing the exact opposite of what's going on. It's like difficult to respond to that.
Yeah. Yeah, and so what he's doing here, and I cut this out of Dave's part, where Dave did like the whole like intro evolution course kind of presentation and talks about universal common descent and how we can infer that we all share a common. Like he went through all this, and so all Subboor here is trying to be like is I'm not going to talk about any of that because that's not the debate topic, right? Whereas he's also going to completely obfuscate on what the definition of the debate topic even is, and then he's just going to go his own direction and talk about something that no one would define these words in the way that he's defining them.
Denis Noble is a joke alongside he's a joke alongside Shapiro and others. Okay, so I want to ask you a question. How is it that you have Cambridge University publishing his book? How do you have it that Oxford University is publishing his book? How do you have it that Nature is publishing his work? The Royal Society is publishing his work? And what you are basically doing is you are denying academia. You are denying science. You're denying the ability of these academics to actually thrive by attacking them without any justification. I asked you very clearly, why is Denis Noble a clown? You repeated he's a clown, you repeated he's a joke, but you didn't give a shred of evidence. In your 3-hour-long video, you didn't give a shred of evidence of that either.
Yeah. So
I mean,
I just wanted to make the case that like anybody can publish under Oxford University Press. Like it's not Oxford University, the college, and it's not like it's a publishing house, right? It's like being able to publish under Cambridge University Press or Oxford or Chicago University Press. Like that's not the same thing as publishing a paper in a technical journal. It's a publishing house.
And I'm pretty sure the papers that he was referencing are also physiology papers too, not evolutionary biology papers.
Yeah.
Right. Like someone could publish in a field A and be completely reasonable and respected in field A, and then step into field B and be a clown and be justly called a clown. And you can't point to, oh, well, they're good over here. Okay, cool. Then go over there then. Like, you know.
Darwinian evolution, something you have to repeat yourself because you weren't being too clear. Something about me raising the flag if I accept Darwinian evolution. That is a total straw man. No one denies the idea that randomness exists. No one denies the idea that natural selection actually exists. I actually accept that natural selection does exist. And I also accept that Darwinian evolution from a background process point of view does actually exist.
So to me, that concedes it, right? If he says, I accept Darwinian evolution, it doesn't matter in the way, like the title is Darwinian evolution a fact? If you say I accept Darwinian evolution, then you've accepted that it's a fact, right? Like that's like to me, that's what you've done. And so that's why I say, I think this is the moment he actually concedes it, is by saying I accept Darwinian evolution in literally those terms.
Yeah, for sure. Like, and maybe you're going to play it, but if Dave is a debater worth half his salt, he won't let that just slip. He'll make sure to bang on it.
But yeah, I mean, Subboor does try to qualify to saying, oh, in this certain context, oh, by this definition, like, and he's just trying to argue that that's not actually what Darwinian evolution is in terms of the topic that he agreed to. Like, he will try to say, a little bit of spoilers here, but he says Darwinian evolution means that only natural selection and random mutations account for literally everything about a person's phenotype, body, and mind, like everything. And if it's not all described by natural selection, then Darwinian evolution is thrown out the window. Like that's what he tries to shift the goalpost to later on.
Yeah, and this is what I mentioned earlier about he's going to shift it, because originally, remember, he defined this as neo-Darwinism is the modern synthesis, which is the foundation of modern evolutionary theory, right? So it seemed like he was going to equate that with modern evolutionary theory. But at several points, he's now backing away from that. And he's now defining it in a completely different way. Yeah, he says this like, genes created us body and mind, right? Like he ends up doing this thing that no one would define the modern synthesis as, right? So he's like, and this is maybe the problem with this debate topic and this debate like title, is that it's too weaselly. You know, you can just weasel the definition around and massage it however you want. You can never get pinned down on it.
Does not create us body and mind. You said Denis Noble is not an evolutionary biologist. You are assuming only people with a genetics background or people working in molecular biology are evolutionists. Why is his field of
I'm sorry, hold on. What does that say? Subboor, what does it say in top left corner? It says the journal of what? What does it say?
Yeah, and this is what I mean, right? Is that when Denis Noble publishes papers on evolution, they're in these kinds of journals, right? Like they're not in the actual evolution journal. So sure, Noble can publish the physiology of evolution, which is again not even like, this is not a technical paper. This is a think piece. It's a perspective piece. So it's not even like he's in the lab doing evolution work. Right? It's preposterous to me.
Like, this is a screenshot that he chose to put in there. Like, you could cropping
He
is a
could've
thing,
cropped it
man.
down.
Just crop it. Just crop
Yeah.
it to the point where it just says the physiology of evolution. Then at least it kind of looks right.
I appreciate that he did this though, because then I didn't have to look this paper up, right?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I commend his honesty, even if it wasn't a good idea.
yeah.
I mean, this is like a kind of, I don't know. I don't even want to get, I was going to say this is similar to like a computer scientist writing some sort of computer code that involves some sort of evolution or natural selection mechanisms in the code, and then having evolution in the title in a journal about computer science, and then saying that person's an evolutionary biologist.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, like anybody that works on evolutionary algorithms, right? Like the computational method of evolutionary algorithm, they wouldn't call themselves evolutionary biologists, right? They're computer programmers, even though they're using principles from evolution.
Physiology, why is his field not considered evolution? In fact, you will find papers published like this, the physiology of evolution. In fact, Denis Noble's entire argument is that physiology guides evolution. Now, remember what I said. You are in a state of a dilemma. You can either attack Denis Noble, or you can be incompetent and, you know, try and challenge him and you're not going to succeed, or you can be a coward and try and avoid it. Now, what you simply said is he's a joke and he's not an evolutionary biologist. Can you give me any evidence for that? Can you give me any reasoning for that? Can you give me any justification for that? Because what you seem to do is you seem to attack academics, but you don't justify your positions. And do you know what? I'm really going to enjoy the 30 minutes. We're going to go back and forth because I'm going to hold you to account for this. So the fact is this, Fareem.
Okay. This is the slide we have to talk about. And this is the moment in the debate where I feel like if I had been James, I might have ended it here. I might have honestly booted Subboor from the stream and like completely ended it out of like, maybe even a little worry that my channel could be like taken down, right? Like that. And so for those that haven't seen this, what appears on the screen that I've blurred is a racial slur. It's a racial slur that actually isn't relative to Dave. It's a racial slur against Hindus, but it's a racial slur. I suspect at the time, like given the way that James and Dave reacted, they didn't know what it was. Like they didn't recognize the term.
I will clarify. Dave did not know what it is, but James does know what it is.
Sorry, you froze for a second. Can you repeat that?
Yeah.
Oh,
Dave did not know this term. He
Yeah.
said so later that he was not aware of it. But James does seem to know what the term means because he later on says, let's not use that word.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, well, so in his review, he said that he eventually Googled it, or that he Googled it live after Subboor had used it here. So it seemed like in the moment they didn't know. But yeah, it's so to me, this was a disqualifying moment. And basically Dave could have like gone to sleep and not said another word for the rest of the debate, and it would have disqualified.
Also,
Subboor,
like the text of this slide, like me as I don't know, maybe other people who don't have my temperament find that stuff entertaining or whatever. But like if somebody does, even leaving the slur aside, if somebody does that on a slide, like it's like, come on, man. Like we in middle school, like what are you doing?
This is basically a comment that Dave made in like a Twitter beef or something where he just said, oh yeah, like I'm gonna take a steamy dump all over your dumb face.
Yeah, that's
and then you're just saying like, oh, you know what people take steamy dumps in public, and then he's trying to like bring it to a racial level.
Yeah.
Oh wow, That's where he was going.
That's where he
Oh
was
my
going.
god, that's
Yes.
way worse than I
Assume I don't. Yeah.
Are you going to act like a professor, or are you going to take steamy dumps on people like a blank?
Oh wow.
Yeah.
That's bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this I had to include this for the reference of everyone in the audience. We won't play the slur like he actually says it later. All of that's removed. I just thought it was important to include it here because I think it's important context. And if I had been James, this would have been the end of the debate.
You have been found to be neutered. You've been found to be domesticated under the environmental pressure of a debate, and you have been found to be deselected.
Okay, so I find this really hilarious. You're whining about my presentation having nothing to do with what you said. That's because you didn't talk about the topic. You're so fucking stupid that you don't even know how to do a debate based on the topic that you chose. So all these other mechanisms you want to allude to has nothing to do with Darwinian evolution. So like I said, look, we can talk about any of these other things you want, but this was the debate title that you chose. So, and it's also why you went first, because that way you could talk about whatever you wanted and pretend that I'm off topic. So you can admit that evolution by natural selection factually occurs. You lose this debate. The second thing we're going to talk about is, as I predicted, you have no ability to discuss science. All you do is Daddy Denis Noble said this other guy said that. Stop whining about what people say and talk about the science. We're going to talk about all of these mechanisms. We're going to talk about the biology. We're not going to go, this guy did this. And by the way, Denis Noble, something in Oxford University Press, whatever. That's not Oxford University. It's a publisher, right? Anybody can publish books. That doesn't mean everything in it is perfect. And it doesn't mean that all of the Oxford faculty is like, yay, go Denis. All right.
Yeah. So this is Jordan, what you were kind of talking about earlier, that who cares what Denis Noble says? What does he actually do? Right. Like what's the actual ideas behind this? Who cares who wrote what book? Like, tell me, explain to me the science behind it and why it matters. And I think this is like the fundamentally different approaches that Subboor and Dave take, right? Like, again, Subboor is a philosopher, he's a theologian, like whatever, like he's coming from like prophets matter and books matter and like history matter. Like he's going to come from that perspective, whereas Dave is coming from a science perspective. And he's like, I don't care about any of the figures here. Tell me the mechanistic details of the science behind it. This is supposed to be a scientific topic. So yeah. Which is unfortunate that we never really quite get there.
And no, I'm sorry, he's not an evolutionary biologist, okay? He's a physiologist. Nobody in the field takes him seriously. It's common knowledge among evolutionary biologists that Noble completely misunderstands key concepts in evolutionary biology. Anytime he's talking about the gene-centric view, anytime he's talking about the central dogma, right? There's this idea that something is contradicting the central dogma. No, it isn't, right? The central dogma, all it says is that the information is going from DNA to mRNA to tRNA and therefore proteins, and that it can't go the other direction in that particular lineage there. Do you know why? Because amino acid residues, right? There are multiple codons that code for the same amino acid residue. And so if you have one amino acid residue, you don't know what codon it came from. You can't go from an amino acid chain, that information, you can't tell what genome it came from. That's all the central dogma is talking about. I don't know why Crick called it a dogma. It's not a dogma. I think he just didn't know what the word dogma means, but that's what the central dogma is. So anytime people bring up like reverse transcriptase or these other things, these other mechanisms, this is really want to get into. This is why I want to talk about science, because anytime you actually try to talk about science, you sound so stupid. It's unbelievable. You were talking about membranes and not being coded in the genome. Well, how the hell are those molecules synthesized? Right? You want to talk about lipids in the membrane. Where do those come from, Subboor? Those come from enzymes. Enzymes build them. And how do you get enzymes? They're coded for in the genome. See, so we're going to talk about.
So I think what he's doing here is he's addressing some of the things that Subboor said in his opening. But the one thing is that Dave doesn't quite do here is connect them, right? So I think it's a little like the way he's reading is a little off the cuff. And so it's not obvious that like what he said right there is actually a direct refutation of the somatic hypermutation thing. But he didn't make that connection obvious. And so I suspect most audience members wouldn't have picked up that because Subboor makes the statement, right, that the B cells and then the antigen binds to the membrane, right? Well, what is it binding to in the membrane? It's a protein coded for in the genome, right? So like that's the connection he's trying to make here, but I don't think it's quite clear to the audience that that's the idea that he's debunking. It's the same thing with the central dogma. I think he should have maybe made it a little clearer that that's what he's trying to tie back to at this point.
The central dogma piece I picked up pretty well. That one I understood what he meant.
Yeah.
That other piece I didn't catch that that's what he was trying to refute. There were enough key points that I remembered Subboor saying stuff about that, and then Dave explained in a way that sounds like, so like my brain was like, oh, he's refuted something Subboor said. I don't remember what it was. That's kind of
I think that some of his rebuttal is it feels like a little off the cuff. And I think if it was a little more structured, it would be a lot clearer about like the points that he's making here.
So to be fair, rebuttal is something you make up on the spot. So
no, it definitely is. And it's like, maybe this is Dave's second formal debate ever, right? Like, I don't know like what his debate background is like. So like the rebuttal parts, I think are some of the hardest to like get down and learn how to do. And so, yeah.
And I'll say like, so far, like compared to where he was when I watched him with Dave Torr, like he's like leagues better. Like this is like a completely different debater,
Yeah. No, I think that like he takes on a lot more of his like teaching voice in this one and I think that comes across much better. And I don't know if it's because, I mean, honestly, like James Torr was like very shouty, right? And like James Torr was like yelling a lot. And if you're being yelled at, like it kind of just like the adrenaline starts running and you're gonna start yelling back. Like it just becomes like an emotionally fueled thing. And I think this setting was like maybe a little bit calmer.
Molecular biology, anything you want to talk about, Noble, don't go, he said this was published in that. Talk to me about science. We're going to talk about science, okay? Because all you ever do is misquote people, and I can't fact check immediately in real time how you're misquoting people. So we're going to talk about science. If you bring someone up, I'm going to say, what are they talking about? Explain it to me. Explain it to me in scientific terms.
So I wish that like the second time when I rewatched this, the main thing I was hoping, like I wished that Dave had done a little bit differently here was give me more specifics. Then rather than just posing the challenge, like, let's talk about science, I was hoping you would say, bring me scientific facts that demonstrate that Darwinian evolution is not a fact or not true. Be specific about what kind of science. So then like, if he tries to talk about science and he could say, this does not refute Darwinian evolution, that put it back to the topic of that we're talking about and be specific about what you're looking for. I felt like it was a little bit too vague to just say, I want to talk about science, because that gives Subboor an out to like bring up random pieces of science that like he doesn't even connect back to the topic.
Yeah. I think that it invites Subboor to be able to introduce, as he's fixing to do, some relatively obscure ideas and then do this quiz thing. This is the part that I felt was just so frustrating to listen to. Whereas I think if Dave had like pinned and be like, okay, tell me this, and that, like laid out the scientific things that he wanted Subboor to discuss, then he would have sort of a framework to drag him to. But instead, Subboor gets to kind of dictate where they go. And I think that ends up being sort of the most unfortunate part about this back and forth. Let's let them get started.
Try to get a bit of clarity on the topic, because there's obviously been some disagreement as to exactly how to understand Darwinian evolution. And I wrote down a couple of points here, and I'd like you both to respond to this. So Subboor said that he defines Darwinian evolution as random mutation plus natural selection can generate mind and body. Whereas Dave described Darwinian evolution as descent with modification plus natural selection. So what appears to be at the core of the disagreement here from Subboor is this idea that Darwinian evolution claims that these mechanisms of random mutation and selection can generate mind and body. So Subboor, I was wondering if you could maybe clarify for us what you mean by that, and then Dave can respond and we can go from there.
Cool. So what we are really speaking about.
Yeah, so I cut out a part there, and it's because he doesn't talk anything about it for like 5 minutes before he finally like And so like Dave is like falling asleep here because like Subboor is like just talking and talking and talking before he finally comes back to this.
Where the moderator should step in and force him back on the topic.
Yeah.
I really do not remember him ever clarifying what he means by mind and body. So
this is this is the closest that he gets in my attempt to try to like make this a coherent thought.
About is, does natural selection plus random mutations, can it create mind and body as the selfish gene purports it can? That is what we need to discuss. Not does Darwinian evolution take place, natural selection with random mutations. Everybody agrees with that. Denis Noble agrees with that. I've agreed with that. If you actually saw my talks, you would hear me saying that exact thing.
That's the title you chose. Right? If you're admitting that Darwinian evolution occurs, that it factually occurs, then why did you name the debate "Is Darwinian evolution a fact?" This is the title that you chose, buddy. And as I predicted, you're just going, Denis Noble, this guy, this book, right? What do you mean creating mind and body? Darwinian evolution creating mind and body. What are you even talking about?
Yeah, I don't know either. It's very vague. I don't know if he's trying, or I assume what he's trying to say is something akin to genes give rise to everything in the organism, right? That it's sort of like back to this like hereditarian thing that we were talking about before, that everything of a person or everything of an organism is dictated by its genes. But it's a very vague, and again, it's actually a reference to Dawkins' selfish gene. It's like one poetic line where Dawkins is like, genes created as mind and body. And it was just meant as like it's a metaphor, right? And in a sense, it's trivially true in such that like bodies and minds don't exist without genes, right? So like to some extent, there is a connection in that genes are necessary prerequisites for bodies and minds, but like that's like trivially true and not really all of that interesting of a thing to point out. But yeah, we never get a very clear answer about what it means for
See, if I was Dave, and one thing that I wish that Dave had done more here is to just keep challenging Subboor's faulty definition of Darwinian. Like he keeps asking for clarification, and Subboor is just demonstrably unwilling to clarify. And so at that point, you just have to say, well, where are you getting this definition? And then he could say, oh, well, this is the definition that Richard Dawkins provides in The Selfish Gene. I'm like, well, who cares what he's talking about in The Selfish Gene? We're supposed to be talking about Darwinism. Like Richard Dawkins is not providing he's not the standard for who gets to define what Darwinism is. It doesn't matter what his throwaway line was in his book for the public. I mean, drill down into just attacking Subboor's definition here, because that's the ultimate source of Subboor's entire argument, is just providing a false straw man definition for Darwinism. And it felt like Dave just continually wanted clarification and was saying, oh, this is meaningless, but he's not going the step beyond into saying this definition is completely erroneous. Here's the real definition. It happens. He does do the point that Jordan, you were talking about, where he says, well, he's clearly conceded the point, but then you see Subboor is just allowed to retreat back to this mind and body thing, and then he just never elaborates on that, and it's allowed to get away with it.
It makes me wish. Sorry, go ahead, Jordan.
I'd say that if I were in Dave's shoes here, I would do the same thing like you're saying. You conceded the debate. This is the debate conceded, but then I'd be like, okay, you don't here's my definition of Darwinism. You don't think it's what's a source you would consider credible? What's a source? And then we'd it would here's if it was a philosophy thing, I'd do the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, but whatever the equivalent would be for biology. Let's just crack that open. We can use their definition. You should have done this before the debate started. But hey, I'll pull it up live right now. And then, because if you're confident that it would support you,
it's also that I don't know. They could have used my definition. Right. I defined what the modern synthesis is in the.
I mean, you are the world's leading biologist.
That Subboor cited. I gave what it meant and the 5 things that are considered part of that paradigm. So the definitions, and at no point do we ever define it as genes created as mind and body. So that's what I mean by Subboor is all changing the definition on the fly. That like he's like, oh, these guys define it this way. I accept what they say, but actually I don't. I am going to define it in a completely different way over here.
When he says mind and body, what I assume he means is something like consciousness, like the soul or whatever.
Yeah.
Which like
Free will.
you can there are people who accept evolution as it currently stands and they believe in souls, and there are people who are atheists and don't believe in it. Like it's just immaterial. It doesn't matter.
Well, like I said, like from his book, that really is the central idea of it, is that the whole, you know, Denis Noble's perception of systems is a lot more vague, and since it has a fundamental basis in agency and purpose and intentionality, like basically like what I think he means by mind and body is exactly right. He means free will, he means a soul, he means spirituality, he means more than just materialism. And that's what he's trying to sub in here and refusing to elaborate.
What I would say is that I would retort that evolution says that the genes got us brain and body. Mind's whatever, consciousness, I don't care. That's not part of this discussion. But that meat in your skull, that, you know.
Yeah.
What I'm talking about is Richard Dawkins' book, The Selfish Gene. You ever heard of that? That's the main claim of the book.
Stop listing books and people. Talk to me about science, buddy. Talk to me about science.
Okay.
Well, it's not for me to get into the debate, but maybe if we can, Subboor, you can explain for us what you mean by generated mind and body, and then Dave can talk about why he thinks that's wrong.
That's perfectly fine. So the idea, and again, I'm going to go back to Noble, and I know Noble is kryptonite for you because you called him a clown. You contradicted his book.
He is a clown.
You contradicted his book multiple times, and you've been caught wanting. You don't actually have the evidence against him. You don't even understand what he said. In fact, I'm just going to ask you a very simple question.
Well, sure.
I'm going to define.
You're already changing the subject, though. By the way, you're already changing the subject.
Dave, can you let him finish?
I'm going to explain this. Okay. So let me explain this to you in very simple terms. Aristotle made distinctions about causality. I know you're nodding your head.
I had to keep that in because it was just the funniest thing. And at a moment I was like, is he trolling? Is this a troll? Is he trolling right now?
This is where like James was so close to like doing his job excellently here, where he you kind of cut off a bit before, but Subboor just straight up appeals to James and is like, James, you know what I'm talking about, right? You know what I mean by mind and body, right? And then that's when James says, oh, it's not really my place to weigh in, but could you just freaking define what you mean? And then he's like, okay, well, like Aristotle, right? And then James is like, Dave, let him finish. And it's like, he's clearly dodging. You as a moderator, you got to say like, are you going to get around to defining mind and body here? And the answer is clearly no. Like what he's actually bringing up here is basically trying to make the argument that biology is not accounting for certain types of causality as Aristotle saw them, like having a final intentioned purpose for evolution, the final cause, or like the form cause of like having some sort of Platonic ideal forms of evolutionary types of thing. It's like that's what he's trying to bring in here, which like it's just a complete non sequitur.
Yeah, it's just bonkers. Like if someone brings up Aristotle and if it's like, bro, this is not 1000 BCE. What are we doing? Like, you know, like
yeah.
It's really crazy, actually. You're right, because they agreed to a debate about Darwinism. They've spent 90% of this debate debating about neo-Darwinism. And then when we are finally trying to drill down on his definition of Darwinism, he starts talking about Aristotle. It's like he's doing everything to avoid the time period in question.
I'd be like, when did Aristotle die, Subboor? When did he die? Was it in the past millennium? Like...
Yeah.
Because it's too much for you, but let me just explain.
No, you're just like we're talking about science and you're jumping to philosophy because you can't talk about science. You can't do it.
Philosophy and science are tied at the hip. Now, what Denis Noble is saying is genes are causes from a form perspective. They are templates. Or in James Shapiro's terminology, they are not read-only files, they read-rewrite files. And according to Richard Dawkins, and anyone can go back and watch the debate, according to Richard Dawkins, his view is that genes are causal. Genes created us mind and body. And I'm going to paraphrase what he's saying. Anyone can fact check me here, that the replicator distinction alongside the vehicle distinction, it is that the replicator controls the vehicle like with a remote control. And in fact, the very ultimate rationale of life is the preservation of genes.
What are you saying? So are you saying that gene expression generates an organism? Can we just say that? What are you saying?
I never used the word gene expression. That's epigenetics, by the way.
No,
By the way,
gene expression is epigenetics. Every time you try to talk about science, you get this gem of stupidity, like gene expression is epigenetics.
One at a time.
Yeah. This is just a wild thing.
I think that Dave is sort of allowing himself to get distracted. Like, he's trying to drill down on the point that Subboor keeps like trying to distract the conversation. But I think like Subboor has thrown out so much BS at this point that it is actually starting to distract Dave, because it's like the things he's saying, like Dave is starting to latch onto, because like, yeah, they are so batshit.
Yeah, I think it's like what Jordan was saying earlier, that as Subboor talks, he just like lets it wash over him, you know? And it's just like, because Subboor is just saying so much shit that eventually it just like flies past you. And then you're just like, I'm not even following you anymore. And then suddenly he says something like this. He's like, wait, what did you just say? And then it's like snaps you back to reality. But like so much of the other shit, just like, you just have to let it wash over you because it doesn't make any sense. And it's so difficult to even connect it to anything like relevant to the topic.
Yeah. I mean, I would, at this point, I would try to bring it back to the topic and say like, okay, let's summarize. You say Darwinian evolution is not a fact because, now give me scientifically, empirically substantiated reasons, and then we can discuss those. Like try to wrangle it back to some degree away from this madness.
With I agree. I would do things like that, like, oh, you brought up Aristotle. What evolutionary biology journals did Aristotle publish in? None? Cool, then he's not relevant. Let's talk about this, you know?
Yeah.
Gentlemen.
What the hell does that mean?
Epigenetics leads to gene expression, doesn't it?
Epigenetics modifies gene expression.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. Okay, now
no,
let's go
what do you mean thank you? What do you mean thank you? What you said was insanely stupid. Gene expression is epigenetics, is what you said.
Let's go back to James's point about causality. I said genes created as mind and body is the idea. Why don't you challenge it?
Because
let's go back to James's point about causality. Like, James didn't bring up a point about causality. Like, he's literally, I mean, I think Dave is taking the bait here a little bit, and just like they got distracted because Subboor said something stupid about gene expression is epigenetics, and then he immediately walked it back as, oh, well, it modulates gene expression, so it must be the same thing. And I was right all along. Now let's get back to the point that James is bringing up about Aristotle.
Yeah, but this is him weaseling out of things, right? And he manages to like easily weasel. He can't get pinned down, you know?
Doesn't mean anything. What are you talking about? I'm trying to talk about science. You're saying something cryptic. Gene expression creates mind and body. Okay, are we saying that gene expression as an embryo generates the form of an organism? Is that it? Let's talk about science, buddy.
The standard idea of the modern synthesis, which in 1976 was really popularized by the Selfish Gene book. Now it goes back to between the 1920s to 50s. You thought it was the 1990s, which itself.
I said that off the cuff, if I even did say that off the.
So this is again Dave getting distracted by him doing this. What he really should do here is be like, what? All right, you said that the modern synthesis is finished by the 1950s. Why are we talking about like how does the Selfish Gene have any relevance to that? Then it's published in 76. Like he literally just set the time frame, right?
And he said popularized by Dawkins in the 1970s. He didn't even say like. Why should we be taking Dawkins as the standard for all of our definitions in this area? Like, he never justifies it, and Dave never asks him to justify why he keeps bringing up Dawkins so much.
Yeah.
Does Dave ever challenge him on the fact that he's using a popular level book? as like
he
the gold
doesn't.
standard.
No, and that's what I was fixing to say. Is like he should be like Richard Dawkins, published in '76 to a general audience, right? Like this is not a science textbook. And it's like it's even confused about what the book was about, right? Like the central argument of the book, even like despite what Subboor is trying to claim, is not that genes created us mind and body. That's not the central argument of the book. The central argument of the book is that the gene is the fundamental unit of evolution. It's the fundamental unit of selection, which is an idea that came about in like the late 60s with the work of George C. Williams and like W.D. Hamilton, like with the kin selection stuff. Like that's where that idea came from. It postdates the modern synthesis, right? And like many evolutionary biologists don't hold to a gene-centric view of evolution. That's just a very specific view that Dawkins was sort of promoting in the late 1970s. That's completely different from the modern synthesis. Most of the modern synthetic architects would not have agreed with it, right? Like Soulwright, Ernst Mayr, Dobzhansky, they all vehemently disagreed with Dawkins on this. So it's like wild to me that he's like putting up or maybe it's not wild. Maybe we know why, because Dawkins is like an outspoken atheist and he's trying to tie them together, right?
But he becomes the avatar of all of evolutionary biology and the consensus, and whatever Dawkins says just equals neo-Darwinism.
Yeah. And it's why they want to like make Dawkins seem like such an important person, right? Like he is like akin to an architect of the modern synthesis, right? And The Selfish Gene is the most important book, because if they can prop him up and make him seem super, super important, then it's easy to trash all the rest of evolution, right? Whereas most evolutionary biologists, if you ask them today, one, can't stand Dawkins for many reasons, and two, would downright disagree with the gene-centric view of evolution, right? So like those things are like while they're popular among the general public, are not things that most practicing evolutionary biologists have a lot of respect for.
Tough in a reaction video. It's not like I did a piece on it.
You're
referencing
wrong?
the reaction video where I made fun of you and
Maybe
your
we can
friend.
move past
Were
this
you wrong?
specific point and focus on.
Okay, were you wrong about that?
I don't even think I said it, but if I did, yeah, it was earlier than the 1990s. So what? It was a reaction video. Who cares?
When was it? Okay, so the reaction video doesn't have to be factually correct. So let me just go back to this idea very clearly. The blind watchmaker, are you aware of this idea? Are you aware of the idea that random mutations plus natural selection is the cause of biodiversity? You aware of this idea?
Primarily, yeah. That's
Okay.
a very large part of biodiversity, yes.
Okay, good. Denis Noble is arguing it is at least a one-eyed watchmaker, not a blind watchmaker. Okay?
Ooh,
So
very cryptic.
It's not very cryptic, actually, because what he's basically saying is physiology guides evolution. That's his claim.
How? Specifically,
so-
mechanistically,
beautiful.
mechanistically.
Beautiful.
There we go.
I'm just going to share my slides again and go over this slowly because you have a comprehension issue.
Okay, I'm gonna let him do this genetic assimilation thing, because I think it's an important part of the debate, and then we can finish there, because we're running out of time, and we as I thought, there's no way we were gonna get through all of this. But I do think this him doing this quiz on the genetic assimilation stuff is probably an important thing.
You got to have that in there.
Yeah.
So genetic assimilation, are you familiar with Conrad Waddington's work?
Go ahead and enlighten me, buddy.
Aha. So, okay. So let me do this first, right? And James, you can stop me if you think I'm going the wrong way. I'm happy to explain genetic assimilation and Conrad Waddington's work, but I don't want to give Farina free education, and I'm going to make a claim. He has no idea what Conrad Waddington was up to and why Denis Noble uses his work. Why don't you explain to me first what this is? And if you fail to do so, then I'll do it.
Okay, so epigenetics, we're talking about modifications to the genome that alter the when genes can be expressed. So DNA methylation and stuff like that. There is some pretty decent evidence for a little bit of inheritance of this over a generation or two. So mainly histone modification, right? If a histone is coordinated to a gene, then it can't be expressed. And if it's not, then it can be expressed. So there are environmental influences that can determine whether the gene can be transcribed at any given time. And it's actually pretty cool. Over the past couple of decades, we figured out that there is some element of inheritance here, maybe a generation or two, but that's it. You have no evidence that this is the same as like random mutations being inherited. So have fun trying to talk about this.
Okay, you didn't mention genetic assimilation.
Okay, tell me what specific phrase you're trying to talk about. I told you what transgenerational. You have a slide up that says transgenerational epigenetic inheritance, and you said, "Tell me about this." And I fucking told you what transgenerational epigenetic inheritance is.
I asked you about.
What are you looking for?
I asked you about genetic assimilation.
Okay, so tell me assimilation. Tell me a thing that you are dying to tell me.
I'm not going to educate you till I prove to the.
Well, I just educated you on what epigenetics is because you don't know that.
No, you answered a question I didn't ask. I asked you about genetic assimilation. Genetic assimilation is linked to epigenetics. It's not the same thing.
So say a thing that you're trying to say, and then
I've caught you now.
No,
and
okay.
I'm going to take you to the cleaners. So why don't you tell me?
You said that gene expression is epigenetics. You said something so unbelievably stupid, and now you're trying to do a gotcha on me. It's pathetic. Explain science, and we'll talk about science.
Slow down.
Calm down, buddy. I see you're getting worked up. Let's just talk about some science.
Please explain genetic assimilation.
What are you doing? If you want to talk about something, talk about.
Yeah, so Subboor, if you have a point that you want to make
the fucking point, dude.
Otherwise, we'll move on.
Okay.
Yeah, so I just had to play that through because I feel like it was like one of the tenser moments in the debate. And I felt like as an audience member, I was just like,
that was my third time being subjected to that, and that was by far the most painful one of the three. Like having to, oh my gosh.
Yeah,
I think that Dave did a decent job. I probably would have stood stronger on where he ended. So like, first of all, whenever someone puts out a term like that or whatever, the way I handle that is by saying, well, the audience isn't in this every day, and we're here for the audience. So why don't you explain for the audience what you mean? Mm-hmm. That it gets the focus off me and onto the topic. Yeah. But yeah, I would have just like if you have a point to make it, and just just flatly refuse to engage after that. No, you make.
I really think I don't know if this was intentional from Subboor, because I almost think that this was like. It's too intelligent for him, or too clever, because he says, oh, I want to bring up the science, right? Like Davis repeatedly said, what is the science that you're trying to bring up as your evidence? So he's, oh, I have a slide on this. So do you know what genetic assimilation is? And then the slide doesn't say genetic assimilation. It has a different term on the slide. And that's the only term on the slide. Dave reads that and has a passing understanding. Like, you can tell that he is aware of transgenerational epigenetic inheritance. Like, he's familiar enough with these studies to where he felt like he was familiar enough to where he could talk about that. So instead of shutting it down immediately and turning what was supposed to be Subboor presenting his scientific evidence that supports his position, it turns into a quiz, and Dave was just confident enough that he knew what the slide was about to where he could just answer it. And he probably should have just shut it down immediately. It said, I'm not going to give your evidence for you. You're supposed to be presenting evidence for your position. It's not my job to give you your evidence. And I would have just refused to engage in the whole quiz.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say that the response that he gave to what was on the thing for me as a viewer made me feel like Dave knew what he was talking about. And then when Subboor was like, no, what about this other thing? He sounded very whiny. So I think had he done the explanation he did, and then when Subboor got whiny, then he's like, okay, well then I tried to explain what I thought you wanted. Why don't you tell the audience? And then just like you said, shut it down from there. So he did some credibility enhancing displays there, which I thought went reasonably well. But it kind of went off the rails. But I think in that exchange, at least for me, Subboor came out looking way worse than Dave did.
Yeah. I think it's. I mean, obviously, one of the goals that Subboor wanted to do here is humiliate Dave, right? He pretty much said as much going into this, that he was going to try to get him into these gotcha moments and to just try to make him look like he didn't know what he was talking about. I don't find these kinds of things helpful or informative, or like giving people pop quizzes. I don't think is in a formal debate is the kind of thing that's going to get you very far. And especially with something, honestly, as obscure as genetic assimilation, which is a super obscure term to most, even to a lot of biologists, it would be a really obscure term. And then Subboor goes on to explain it and explains it wrong. Doesn't even give the correct definition of it.
Sorry, I stepped on you then.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, the quiz thing could potentially have its place, but you run a risk because if the audience also doesn't know it. So basically what Subboor is saying is if you don't know this, you're an idiot.
Mhm.
Well, the audience that you're trying to convince, if you're basically telling the audience that they're idiots by proxy, that could undermine your goal of persuading the audience. It might make you feel to the audience less like a smart person and more like just a douche.
Well, he does.
Whereas if it was something like fundamental that you feel like people, even if they don't actually understand it, they feel like they understand it, like that might be fair play, perhaps.
Yeah. Well, Subboor does go on, and since we're out of time, I won't play it, but Subboor does go on to try to make the case that if Dave is going to call Denis Noble a clown, but he doesn't know about this term that's central to Denis Noble's argument, then how could he possibly call him a clown? Right. So that's kind of what Subboor is eventually going to do here. I guess as far as like whether or not I expected Dave to know this, I wouldn't have expected Dave to know this just like in his head, just like have this knowledge in his head. But there is, to some extent, he must have known this topic could have come up. Or like if he had known that we were going to be talking so much about Denis Noble and so much about like the third way and that kind of thing, that it's a thing that one would be good for one to brush up on. But yeah, I find it like is really uncomfortable. It makes the audience feel like that whole dynamic feels uncomfortable. I don't like it. It's cringy. I can't stand it. Yeah.
I mean, it's purely just a rhetorical and aesthetic strategy to try to make Dave look like he doesn't know what he's talking about. That's it. It's just for clips.
Yeah. Okay. So,
Are we going to talk about genetic assimilation and like why it doesn't support?
No, maybe we should do that. Okay. So what Subboor is trying to argue here with genetic assimilation, or the way I'll give his quick definition of it. The way he tries to define it, because he's going to make the case that, genetic assimilation means that physiology can guide evolution, right? And so effectively you get these epigenetic markers that then get assimilated into the genome. Now, when you say it that way, it makes it sound like the markers themselves sort of like seep into the genome and become part of the genetics, and now physiology has guided evolution. I think that's what he's trying to present. That's like fundamentally incorrect. That's not even remotely close to what Waddington was talking about. And what Waddington was talking about was a little bit more complicated than that. So in effect, and I'll try to do this as cartoonishly as possible. In effect, you can imagine a population has lots of variation, right? Lots of genetic variation in that population. And yet most of the population are relatively similar in how they look. And the idea here is that development essentially funnels individuals into similar phenotypes. So you can have lots of genetic variation down here, but the regulatory networks are constricted by development to basically give rise to more or less similar individuals, okay? Now, what then happens, let's say the environment changes, and suddenly that regulatory network shifts. And by shifting that regulatory network, none of the genes have changed, but now you can have new phenotypes emerge from that with the same underlying genotype. The modern way we would describe this is plasticity, right? That organisms can plastically respond to their environment. Now, nothing has happened genetically, and none of this is heritable. Okay, these are changes in the gene regulatory network, but they only happen so long as the environment keeps acting on development every generation, right? So you're not passing on to your offspring this new phenotype. The original phenotype is still canalized in its original position. Now, what genetic assimilation is if that environmental pressure sticks around long enough, then the underlying genetic variation can eventually fix by mutation and recombination and selection, and eventually canalize that new form. And then when the environment, like if the environmental pressure goes away, you are now stuck in this new body form. So the way it's often presented as is plasticity precedes genetics. So you can plastically respond really quickly to the environment. And then while you're plastically responding, the underlying genes can mutate, can change, and be selected. And then now you become genetically assimilated for that phenotype. Does that make sense? I know it's kind of convoluted, but does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, so like I will just fully admit that whenever I first listened to this debate, I had not heard of genetic assimilation, right? So I went and I read up on genetic assimilation and then saw that like since Conrad Waddington's original experiment, the experiments were like repeated, this time with something that he didn't have, a genetic sequencer. And what they showed in when they were actually looking at what was happening to the genome of these organisms is that like the environmental shock treatment that generated the phenotypic plasticity, it was like activating like transposons and actually causing mutation events to the genome. So it's like, yeah, like this is literally just mutation plus selection.
Like, so that's his experimental results, right? But the theoretical idea that he proposed was about plasticity. He could definitely have been wrong with his like experimental results, but that's not the way that he thought that they were happening.
Yeah, but
even in the theoretical framework, it's still a neo-Darwinian process because it's still mutations that have to happen, recombination has to happen, and selection has to change the underlying genotype. And nothing that is happening in the epigenetics phase, like when the regulatory network is just being plastic, none of that is heritable. It's not getting passed on, right? You're just hoping the environmental pressure stays on you long enough for the underlying genes to eventually fix that phenotype in place. If it doesn't, then you go right back to how you were when the environmental pressure goes away, right? It's just plasticity.
I suppose I was just trying to make the point that like even like there is the doubt in the scientific community about like the original theoretical explanation for his results. And like when his experiment was repeated with more modern technology, like his theoretical explanation did not hold up to what was observed to happen in his example. So it's like, even like what he's relying on here, genetic assimilation, is a pretty fringe, and like it doesn't even seem like it's empirically held up as like oh yes, we definitely know genetic assimilation is a known, empirically verified process.
Yeah, so Waddington was kind of a fun guy in that he put the idea first, he put forth the idea first theoretically in 1942 as a way of being a contrarian. He was like, okay, you guys have rejected the inheritance of acquired characters, but wait, hear me out. What if it happened like this, right? And so he was just trying to like be a contrarian and give a possible way where you could still possibly call that the inheritance of acquired characters if you're plastically responding, and then that plasticity eventually gets genetically controlled, right? It's obviously not the inheritance of acquired characters like what we would think of, but he was just being contrarian and trying to put forward a new idea. The idea, again, to me is cool. There's nothing wrong with it. And it, to me, completely fits in with normal neo-Darwinian theory. It's a little different in that it plays into things like plasticity. But one, it's kind of hard to demonstrate. It's a hard thing to prove experimentally. So we don't have very much experimental evidence for it, right? It's mostly a theoretical construct. But I think for the key point for this debate and for what happened here in this back and forth is that it in no way supports the idea that physiology guides evolution, right? It's the thing still guiding evolution is mutations and selection, right? Happening at the genetic level. It just so happens that organisms can plastically respond, and their ability to respond plastically is itself a property of adaptation, right? It's that adaptation has itself occurred.
Just to read it back to make sure that I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Imagine hypothetically there was a creature that when it got cold, they would put on more fat or something. And that was like the adaptation. Yeah. And so like at that pressure is there, they'd have more fat because the pressure's there. But if it stopped being there, they would stop having more fat. And if that pressure stayed there long enough, eventually having more fat would be selected for, and then they would just become more fat. It would no longer be that like pressure, it's just that's just where they are. And then if it suddenly became warm because we started dumping a bunch of greenhouse gases in the air, then they would still be fat and then they would die.
Yeah. Because the underlying genetics actually now shifted to make that's.
But we don't know if that is a thing that actually happens. It's just an idea that might.
It's just an idea. It's an idea that seems plausible. Like it seems like it could possibly happen, but it's kind of hard to show it experimentally, right? Like because the rate at which genes fix and like these things can be assimilated is much slower, right, than the rate at which organisms can respond plastically. So the difference in the timing of those two things make it very hard to do experiments to demonstrate this. It's sort of been the problem. But it's discussed, and it's like, again, I think it's a cool idea, and I don't like have anything necessarily wrong with it theoretically. But yeah, there's just no evidence for it, and that's the unfortunate thing about some really cool ideas is if you just don't have any evidence for it. Okay, yeah. So I think we're going to call it there. We're going for 2 hours and 18 minutes. We didn't get through as much of it as we wanted, but I think we did get through, a good portion. You basically got to see everything. Some closing ideas. What do you think? Who do you think did better? Who do you think presented their case better? And do you feel like, as the audience member, you came away knowing more about the topic than you did before?
I think that, first of all, I am floored with Dave's performance. He's head and shoulders above where he was. So it's great that he's learned from his mistakes. That was good on him. I think that I've been in the situation where the person changed the topic on me live in front of me. It's a very frustrating place to be. So I empathize with his struggles there. I think given the situation he was in, he came off as a lot more knowledgeable to me. I felt like after he talked, I understood more. And every time Subboor talked, I either understood less or it made no difference,
Yeah.
And I wasn't ever clear why what he was saying tied back to what he was trying to say. Whereas Dave, at least, it felt like he was refuting Subboor's points, even if he wasn't completely clear on them. So I don't think there's any contest. Dave won that. But there were things he could have improved on, but I mean,
I would just like to make one final point at the end that I feel like is important to talk about, because what I really got after having listening to this, 2.5 times now, I felt like maybe it didn't come across in the clips that we were watching from, but I got a really strong impression on my second time that by the open discussion point, Subboor had retreated to basically making the argument that, and this is how I understood his argument about Darwinian evolution means that variation and natural selection, mutation, natural selection has to account for everything about our body and mind, and that is what he was defining as Darwinian evolution. And that if there's other factors at play, if there's things like genetic drift or epigenetics or something, then Darwinian evolution is not a fact. That's what I took his final argument, or his final position is that's how it came across to me, at least.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to address that in a way, and I'll address it with an analogy, since Subboor loves him some analogies. I'll just say, you can look at another scientific theory, like the germ theory of disease. And if you were to define the germ theory of disease as to be, all diseases are caused by germs. And so therefore, genetic diseases, like Huntington's disease or something, like genes that you're just, you have a mutation and that's where you get the disease from. Therefore, the germ theory of disease is not a fact. That is exactly the kind of argument that I take Subboor to have been making by the end of this. And I hope that my little analogy there at least explains why I think it's totally bunk. Dave was completely right and Subboor was even right. In both of them agreed that mutations and natural selection do happen. Darwinian evolution is a fact that happens. And it was only Subboor changing the definitions around to try to knock down a straw man, and fail to even do that. So no contest for me. That although Dave wasn't perfect, at least Dave seemed to be coming at this and he wanted to actually talk about the topic, and Subboor just seemed like he wanted to use the topic as an excuse to make Dave look bad.
Yeah.
And if that was his goal, he did not do a good job. He failed at that.
Yeah. I mean, the tactics in which he tried to do it, I think, were quite reprehensible. I the trying to pin somebody down in a pop quiz kind of thing is annoying, but you see it happen all the time. Whatever. But it's the racism. It's the slurs. It's that kind of language. that to me is just despicable and that like has no place in public conversation at all. And so, yeah, I also think that I feel like this conversation could have been a little bit better if they had talked a little bit more about the definition of these ideas beforehand. They could have like maybe hashed this out in a little bit clearer way. But to me, at the end of the day, Subboor literally said, I accept Darwinian evolution, like literally said it, right?
Yeah.
And so to me, that's it. Like if you say the debate title, if you accept it in the affirmative, then you've conceded it. And to me, that's basically it.
I know I said I'll only make one final point, but I just have one thing that just came to my mind here is like, I wonder what would have happened if at the very end of this, because it didn't, I don't know what point Subboor was even trying to make. So I think it could have been interesting at least to have said, okay, Subboor, if I were to just accept every single thing that you've said so far and just completely concede, what then? Like, where are you going with this? Like, what should we then conclude? Like, what are you actually trying to say here? Like, if I were to just agree with you that it's not a fact, like, why did you agree to do this debate? What's your ultimate goal here?
Yeah. And I think that would have immediately exposed the fact that Subboor had to accept a lot of things along this way. Like Subboor, I assume, is a creationist and is actually conceding universal common descent. He's conceding like the vast, like you know, the vastness of time. Like he's actually conceded most of the debate about evolution if we're up to this point. And I bet if Dave had pushed him on that, he probably would have also been in an uncomfortable situation where he would have had to admit it, how much he's conceding to even be arguing Noble's point in the first place.
Because we know that he rejects evolution. He rejects universal common ancestry. So there is legitimately like disagreements here where like the position that he's taking on here is not his true position. It's not just that he thinks Darwinian evolution is not a fact. And it's not just, oh, we need a more holistic systems biology view of evolution. Like he is rejecting the entire evolutionary tree. So like there's a lot to talk about disagreements that he just didn't seem to want to publicly get into.
Yeah. And you could, in Dave's position, we talked about character assassinations. That is something that could be a fruitful character assassination, in my opinion, because be like, hey, this guy is putting out this thing. Just so you know, he's lying to you. This is not what he believes. This is other thing is what he actually believes. We're not going to talk about that today because that's not the topic of the debate, but you should know he's a liar. Anyway, like, and that's how you do a character assassination.
Yeah. Okay, so with that, we're going to wrap up. I'm going to give both of you opportunity. Tell us what you've got going on your channels, and I think I've linked both of you in the description below. But yeah, Jordan, tell us what's going on in Reason to Doubt.
Yeah, great question. So we are going to be doing an episode next week, I believe, on community. And as atheists specifically, but skeptics more generally, I think that one of the biggest shortfalls that the atheist, I'll say non-theist community has is a failure to replace the community that a lot of people coming out of religion have with anything else. And that makes it very difficult for somebody to leave the religious structure they were in. And so I think we could do a much better job about that. So I'll be talking about that next week. And then because that's going to be more deep and tiring, I'm going to do another thing where I'm just going to take like the craziest comments I've gotten on the Shroud of Turin and just say why they're crazy. I constantly, I cannot tell you how many times people have asked me why I don't claim that $1 million prize for recreating the Shroud. So maybe I'll explain that. I don't know.
Nice.
And then, yeah, it's kind of a complicated question for me right now because I'm sort of gearing up to take a trip. So I'm not sure what is on the immediate horizon for my channel, but there's a lot on my to-do list and a lot of videos that I've been wanting to get to. So it's not like, channel's not going away. I just don't know when I'll have time to to do a debate or to make the next video. But I mean, yeah. I still, I've got lots of things on the back channel. I've got a lot of pseudoscience that I've gone through. I actually want to get a video on the Shroud of Turin. So maybe I'll have to team up with Jordan for that one because I just watched Michael Knowles, his video on the Shroud of Turin. And we got some things I got to say about that. So yeah, maybe there's a collab.
Shoot me now.
All right. Yeah, I guess so. I started a project a long time ago that was supposed to be about sort of unveiling how science works and like showing what evolutionary biologists really do. And I was going to walk the audience through like the project from start to finish. The project is now very near finished. The associate editor for the journal is now like the paper says the decision pending. So hopefully I will have a decision on the paper, and then I can write the script and actually unveil to everyone 2 years later how a scientific project works. And maybe as a bit of a spoiler, it takes like 2 years from the start of a scientific project to the paper finally being published. So I'm very excited about that. Hopefully I can kind of put that together and like show everybody a little bit about how evolutionary biology is actually done. Okay, yeah, with that, thanks everyone for being here. This was a ton of fun. Thanks Jordan and Grayson for being willing to do this. And I will catch you all next time. See ya.